of my hands.
Check.
You look up, but your sky is crowded. Tiny screens drowning out the span. Every face glowing in the blue light. Every street buzzing, sharp and loud. I float in the gravity of old fights. You laugh like it's just another cloud. From up there, you're a blue marble, bruised paper thin halo, hanging abused. I held my breath as you spun in the dark. How can you burn what you are? How can you burn what you are?
This is my band, Asa.
To a scratched window. Porcelain, balanced on black.
All right, we're running a little later than usual, so I'm going to get started, and we'll speed up as we go along. I want to remind everybody, hey, welcome to the show, everybody. It's Hal Sparks Mornings, Mega Worldwide. Hit the like, share the show. Sending the like out right away helps us in the algorithm, and yeah, the audio seems choppy. I will fix that and remedy it before we get started. It's usually a jump around in there. It takes a moment, maybe refresh, as it were. We'll keep track of that during the day if it's during the show. But I am recording as well so that we will, sound okay on Twitch and everywhere else. It might be a reload thing on YouTube. So if you guys refresh, you should be fine. Happy Motang Monday to everyone who celebrates, of course, especially those in Michigan.
Michigan gave us Motang.
And, who can live with less tang. Now, let me get to my first guest who's been waiting patiently, but also we've been having a good conversation before we even get started. Asif Romarovsky joining me. How are you? Fine, sir. Thanks for rejoining the show to talk about, I think, probably the most contentious window of topics that exist is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Gazan possible, if there is a ceasefire, it's hard to tell. The latest dust up, I would say, about accusations of anti-Semitism towards Mark Ruffalo by Paramount, which he responded to very heavily. And it seems to be that this conversation winds people up to the point of not being able to have a rational discussion about it on all points, because I think a defender becomes a staunch defender because everybody feels on their heels, and arguably I would say the anti-Semitic people who've been waiting in the wings, like Tucker Carlson, see blood in the water and an opportunity, and those two parallels seem to tip the conversation, the velocity of the conversation higher all the time.
Well, good morning as always.
Morning.
And, it's good to be together. Yes, I mean, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the velocity it always increases. There has been, to my mind, this is something that I've been tracking for a very long time, is what I call the normalizing of anti-Semitism in American society. And if you look at the shoehorn kind of imagery, it's hitting the far left and the far right, and they're all coming together as far as...
I mean, the horseshoe. Yeah, the horseshoe.
Yeah. Yeah, shoehorn, horseshoe. It's all coming together in the
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a shoehorn. There's a shoehorning of the horseshoe of overlapping metaphors. I understand. Yes, go ahead.
Exactly. Many metaphors that are overlapping together. But
right.
The horseshoe political metaphor does come together as far as the political extremes. And in my last book, and one of the last things that I did was really talk about the convergence of the red, green, and brown alliance, where you have the socialists, you have the Nazis, and you have the Islamists all coming together under one greater hatred. And within this pyramid, within higher education, or what is the kind of the common zeitgeist in American college campuses, something known as intersectionality. Within the
Mhm.
pyramid of intersectionality, the religiosity of the day is Palestinianism. There is no other, oppressed group that is, that is more oppressed or so-called oppressed than the Palestinian narrative. So if you believe in oppression, even though there is really no data to connect intersectionality together, you have to, the simpatico goes that you must support the Palestinian narrative. And so you have this convergence of ideologies all coming together from a financial standpoint, which is really another critical part, is even looking at the money trail. All you've got to do is look at the funders of the Mamdani campaign as a poster child of the red, green, and brown alliance all coming together. And you're
Mhm.
seeing that across the board, and the disconnect, between the LGBTQ community when they were calling and demanding queers and gays for Palestine or women's rights for Palestine.
Right.
I mean, if you're openly gay or queer or LGBTQ or whatever you are in Gaza, you would literally be hung. Similar in Iran. I mean, these are not, so the ideologies that, that these areas in some way, shape, or form are presenting and illustrating the Palestinian cause for their rights is ludicrous. But there is this imagery that plays into this narrative that the
Mhm.
immediate visceral reaction is genocide, quote unquote, in Gaza, and of course apartheid and everything else that happens with that. And there has been a flipped narrative where I would argue, historically speaking, that now Jews are the Goliath, and Israelis, by that matter, and Palestinians are the evergreen David. And so that flip narrative has concretized the evergreen victimology of Palestinianism in every way, shape, or form. And when you have individuals like Mamdani who are calling for globalized intifada, when you have candidates who are running for the primaries in Michigan, Al Sayed, who basically has funding, his father is his father was connected to funding with CARE. His mother, who nobody talks about, was only of late was actually fundraising money for Al Qaeda and other kind of terrorist organizations. You have this coalition of monies that are coming together to support a very distinct narrative, which is basically marginalized and they're working very hard to ostracize Jews and Israelis from every possible public sphere in
Mhm.
American society.
Yeah,
And
let's
by the way, we just
yeah.
add to that that they're using this kind of terminology when they talk about Jews and Israelis, APAC or things like that. These are all interchangeable terms in order to demonize the Jew.
Mhm. So, one of the uh, okay, and I don't know that Mamdani, for the record, said it. He just refused to condemn it, which again is, this like the passive agreement aspect of that can be argued back and forth. But what I would say is that there is certainly blame to be laid at the alignment factors that drive up the enemy of my enemy is my frenemy situation that has created what would be that overlap on campuses that Donald Trump and the people around him, to some degree, represent such an existential threat to democracy and this sort of like might makes right crowd that which is why he likes Xi Jinping. It's why he likes Putin. It's like why he likes Kim Jong Un. Is that this is part of his ideology that in everybody becomes part of the us against him in that circumstance. And there's a weird alliance between the sort of global great man of history that Trump intends to make himself. Clearly, in all of his statements, with his list of putting him on the same, he put himself on the same list as Hitler and Mao. He didn't pick Gandhi and Jonas Salk as the great men of history. These kind of things. He specifically was picking these dictators, and that anybody who's against that suddenly finds themselves in that first they came for them, then they, when I said nothing and they didn't come for me, boat, oddly enough, as the analogy goes. So that you've got this intersectionality that's kind of weighed against the greater threat. And his alignment with evangelicals, and specifically evangelical Zionists, created, part of this storm about this, because I would argue that the evangelical Zionists, who are a very specific cut of deeply religious people worldwide and certainly have more influence, ironically, on this White House, considering the president's lack of biblical knowledge or faith or any of that stuff. They have aligned themselves so heavily with him that these are the folks who the creation of Israel for them, I would argue, was one of the greatest acts of anti Semitism in history, in that for the revelation that they believe to occur, for the end times to occur, for Jesus to come back, all the Jews have to be grouped back in together in Israel. For a period of time, everything's hunky dory. And then Armageddon happens and they're all judged for killing Jesus. And that evangelical strain has been rising in right-wing circles for quite some time. It always had a seed of it, but it was always kind of subtly there. But in Donald Trump, there's this ironic alignment between that crowd who believes that Israel was created just so the Jews could be killed, and the Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, wow, Gaza's a nice piece of real estate. Wouldn't it be great to build a resort there? And an alignment with, this, I don't know, there's a disconnect between the ideology of the Likud and the people who are for a greater Israel policy. And Trump's just not taking that seriously as a thing. And that mix creates this villain that's easy for everybody to lob a grenade at, because there's something to hate for everybody. You see where I'm going with that? Because a lot of times you'll find this intersectionality in that, like, look, you and I would normally be at odds, but this is the bigger threat. This would, climate change, great example of where that doesn't normally work. You can get countries to align that don't align in theory, ethically, morally, or whatever, once they come to the realization that climate change could be an existential threat to them. At that point, they might put all their other cultural, social, even legal problems aside, border-wise, because the threat is seen as so big. That perception allows them to put down their weapons amongst themselves and fight together. Now, the ultimate result, more than likely, is as soon as that's handled, back to the original fighting, and anybody who can get a toehold during that time, which I think is what you're speaking of in terms of the sort of Islamic push to the front of the line in terms of leftist politics right now, which has always been around. It's that's not new either. Arguably the Soviet Union created the PLO. That's they've been using that as a leverage point for a long time as a Western distraction. And I know I'm dumping a lot on you in this regard, but my point overall is, when those who represent what would effectively be the victim in a circumstance start acting, in defense to a point where it tips over into the public perception that's been lying in wait, the anti-Semitism of the Tucker Carlson crowd, and the Islamic overlap of early, communists and socialists back in the 30s to 50s. Those folks, a lot of people thought we'd pass that history and we'd move forward, and we clearly haven't, because those people have been biding their time and building their, and hiding their strength, as Mao said. So that's part of the problem right now, is that I think there's a feasting going on by people who were never not anti-Semitic, and they now have an opportunity. And how much does Trump and Netanyahu, I would say, bear some responsibility for allowing that in their mishandling of, or their overt strongman of history attitude towards themselves?
Okay, so let's try to break it down. I mean, you threw out a lot of
yes,
data
it's a
points,
lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
That need to be
Sorry.
kind of looked at very carefully. So,
Sure.
from my perspective, Soviet ideology. Let's focus on the Soviets for a second. The current anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic narrative was concretized in many ways. What you're seeing on American college campuses stems from Soviet anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The Soviets, back in the 1950s and the 1940s, were testing out terminology that would resonate with American Western society, and they would figure out liberal terminology, resistance, human rights, and whatnot, enable them to parachute that within a Western environment with the same ideology that they could basically take that, system over. So you had systems, which, what I would call today within the age of infotainment, where you
Yeah.
had a hijacking of areas of soft power, namely the academy and journalism. You had journalists, who were writing for the New York Times who were communists and were trying to get out a communist message all around, as far as people like Durante and others. I mean, so you have that narrative. The PLO was able to adopt that narrative. And it's no surprise on the issue of the PLO in particular that you have even the current chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is a byproduct of a Soviet institution where he argued in his entire dissertation that Zionism and Nazism are one and the same. And that's a downloadable PDF on the PLO's website, been translated into English, into many languages. And so there is a connection there between Soviet, narratives and PLO narratives, as far as, again, founders of the PLO were very much Marxist, and were very much inspired by the environment that was happening on American college campuses during the 1960s. The Black Panthers, the Weather Underground. I mean, this was all this kind of revolutionary movement that were inspiring to them. And by the way, it's also important to note that much of their early activism began on Arab universities. So they figured this was a springboard for this kind of activism that would lead them into normalizing and concretizing the hate through agents of soft power. And so that's how this psychology worked out here, as well as buying into the same kind of ideology that allowed them to buy professors and chairs and whatnot. And so this is, what leads, if you fast forward to the environment today, where you have radical students who are aspiring and espousing these same kind of ideologies on American college campuses. That's one part as it relates to
yeah. Let's pause that at one point. Let me address some of that with you. And I would argue my biggest problem with it is how temporary it was, and that a lot of it seemed more like a controlled opposition or artificial opposition, in that as soon as Trump announced there was a deal, and a ceasefire in Gaza and stuff, where I would argue things are almost back to where they were before October 7th, that there's this constant firing back and forth. There's the Israeli policing of that area. There's a lot of devastation that won't be cleaned up for a very long time, but that line went right back to it, and yet the complaints didn't. They just kind of vanished. And so that's where I feel like there's a lot of that kind of the idea of a controlled opposition that made that fight in the first place, which again helps gin up the right-wing support for Israel and the like, from a right-wing tack. And so this kind of ping-ponging and the relation it has to the sort of Russian control of infotainment, as it were, is directed at that. Is that that right now Tucker Carlson is saying, how does Israel control the policies of the United States? And I would argue they absolutely don't. Inarguably, there is more of a Russian pivot point with Trump's relationship to or compromise with Vladimir Putin, whatever control he seems to have over him, that they have thrown this laser pointer on this distraction between the two and ginned up the fight there to pull the eye. It's like the apartment fires in Russia, that you start that fire and you do everything you can to make it worse. And that draws attention away from other stuff that you should be paying attention to specifically, and it uses other people as victims of that process, right?
Well, let's also be clear that Carlson is 100% funded by Qatar. I mean, Qatar has an agenda. Qatar has been able to buy influence, throughout the United States. Qatar has been playing Qatar, to my mind, is a terror-sponsored, state, and has been able to buy influence in the United States and been playing itself as a firefighter, as an arsonist. And Carlson, Tucker Carlson, to my mind, is basically, in their back pockets. What's going on. I mean, there's one point that I take issue with. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, 10/7, did not come in a vacuum, but 10/7 was one of the worst atrocities since the Holocaust that we saw take place. Is Israel safer and better than it was, since 10/7? Yes. I mean, from a safety security standpoint, let's also look at the reality. I mean, there's no hostages currently in Gaza. There is a question about what the future of Gaza looks like. But if you're talking about the multi-front war with Iran, that was a dimension of what led to 10/7 to happen, and happened, an enormous amount of military and intelligence mistakes that took place that led up to 10/7 to take place. There is, Israel was able with, again, I think, this is, a regional problem, to turn the corner. We're talking about the fact that Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, is no longer around the table. Khamenei, the leader of Iran, is also dead. I mean, the architect of 10/7, Yahya Sinwar, also dead. I mean, as far as the people that perpetrated 10/7, that is indeed change. Now, there is a fundamental question, and you're getting a little bit, here we are 3 years since the war began, and it's a very different environment now that we've turned the corner. Where are we going next? What does all of this looks like? Israel is also going into the first time elections, since 10/7 on October 27th. This will be the first election since the war took place. And there's a lot of issues when it comes to people's grievances as far as how Netanyahu and the Netanyahu government managed the war, mismanaged the war, what led up to all of this, in tandem while we have obviously our midterms. These are big questions that are going to impact how the voters are going to vote. Obviously, when it comes to the Israeli elections on October 27th. But that being said, there is a question about fundamental security. Can Israel, as a government, look their citizens in the eye and say, you are safe? And the fact of the matter is that there is nobody on the other side in Gaza. I mean, I take serious issue with the fact that Jared Kushner is now meeting with Halil al-Hayya. Halil al-Hayya, who is a member of Hamas, and basically normalizing Hamas's role in the reconstruction of Gaza. While on the other side of all of this, the fact of the matter is that the objectives of Israel was to dismantle Hamas entirely. There's no way.
Right.
Government of Israel, whatever comes about after post October 27, right, left, or center, is going to live with Hamas as their neighbor. We've seen, what Hamas is able to do. We've seen exactly what Hamas's objectives are, excuse me. And if you talk about Hamas's narrative, Hamas is yearning and aspiring to more 10/7s. That hasn't changed. And so there's a fundamental question about, which has been the question from the beginning. Are you able and can you able to divorce yourself, in Gaza from the civilian population, whatever exists, from Hamas? And if Hamas is still, the governing body, that's a non-starter. And so when you're normalizing Hamas now by allowing an American official, a la Jared Kushner, to come in and normalize relations with Halil al-Hayya, that presents a fundamental problem for the Israelis.
Gotcha. Okay, so real quick, in terms of the Trump administration and any of their representatives, Trump's whole thing for a long time is we'll meet with anybody. A lot of that has been read over time, and certainly on the MAGA side, as that he is deferential to these kind of people and that he will, be, too good to them. I would argue that that's sort of what happened with North Korea, that he gave them, when he came into office, they had 7 nuclear weapons. Now they have 57. And it was in large part to him just saying, fill your boots. When it comes to Jared Kushner meeting with the leader of Hamas or other groups, perhaps there are deals being made. There tends to be a plan to buy folks off. I think that's the argument about Netanyahu financially creating Hamas because he was paying the money. I would argue that there was part of a normalization act that they did, kind of the PLA at the very least, where they're trying to okay, we'll give you some supportive funds, we'll act as a partner, blah, blah, blah. And then sometimes that works, and sometimes more moderate people kind of take over. And a lot of times it just doesn't. You pay the guys off and they split, and you just let them collapse where they are. And with Jared Kushner, I personally, I don't know anybody that would trust whatever message he's either carrying from Trump or whatever he has himself. And that it seems more likely that the idea that Jared Kushner is, would be siding with Hamas or legitimizing them seems more likely that he is using the $1 billion slush fund that they created under the Board of Peace, or the $1 billion slush fund he runs on behalf of Saudi Arabia and others, to pay off some troublemakers and make them leave the area. And that these guys are going to get a giant reward, not unlike what happened in Syria, where the leadership just runs off to Russia and lives in Sochi and they're bunking up with whatever. Like, just let us pay you off and we'll handle it from here. That seems to be the attempt there, right?
But to that point, I mean, that was also the miscalculation of Netanyahu, I would argue. I mean, when you go back on what led up to 10/7, I mean, the fact of the matter is that they underestimated Hamas. I mean, the Israelis have been laser focused on Iran for 30 years, correctly so. Now, the fact of the matter is that they miscalculated the threat of Hamas. Here you have a Yahya Sinwar coming about and leads one of the largest massacres of Jews. The common marauders and basically are killing Jews. Now, the fact of the matter is that money that allowed to come in under Netanyahu, to your point there, is the fact that they believed, and I think foolishly, that economic carrots would dissuade them away from the ideology. And here you have a way to say that there's no amount of money that you're going to be able to pay any of these guys to give up the Islamist ideology. The Islamist ideology is binary. There are believers and there are non-believers. Non-believers have no right to exist. And it doesn't matter how much money you're going to give them and how much money you're going to pay them off. While you had pallets of cash that the Israelis have been able to find, the IDF through the doxing, going in and finding, pallets and pallets of cash that went in through Qatar. It went, the chain of money that came in from Qatar to Turkey to Gaza. That's where the money is going. That's where the money came from. That's where the money went back and forth. So, on the Kushner front, I just want to be clear. Kushner and Witkoff did a great job when it came to releasing the hostages. There is no doubt that these hostages who are alive and well would not be out as it wasn't a result of the superb work that they were able to do, and they had to negotiate with bad actors in order to make that happen. That's fine, and they deserve credit for that. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, the families of the hostages, the survivors, acknowledge that they got more support from Kushner and Witkoff than they did from their own government as a result of how much they went to bat to get these people alive. That is indeed a worthy and needs to be acknowledged. Sure. However, now we're dealing with a different Gaza. Now we're dealing with Gaza, which is Hamas is trying to reinvent itself under a force of so-called law and order, which it's not. It hasn't given its ideology. And here we are trying to negotiate with them. Now, if Hamas, and this is my point about the reconstruction of Gaza, is still the normalizing force or wannabe force around the table, this is a non-starter for the Israelis. The Israelis are never going to allow this to happen. That's why they can't leave Gaza. There is no force that they can allow that is going to convince any Israeli constituent that they have that can actually work to actually maintain a safety and security that can work on both ends of all of this.
Real quick, I see where you're going, but I also go like, do you think Jared Kushner is aware of that or knows that? And in knowing that, he's one of two things have to be happening. Either he's via wishful thinking living in some sort of fantasy land, or this is a mockery of talks in an attempt to show the world, look, we gave these guys every chance we did before we swept the leg. And there's an element to that is parallel in the Iranian talks as well. Donald Trump has been saying since the beginning of the second part of the Iran war, and by the way, if he stopped it right now, they'd start it up again next year. The only thing, Trump's Iranian fixation has gone on for a long time, and a lot of it has more to do with what the Saudis want as far as developing business in the Middle East, I think, than the protection of Israel long term. I think that's just a bone he can throw the evangelical vote. But Trump is not a religious man and doesn't care, and certainly ethnic or religious identity means nothing to him. He's a racialist. So, but Jared Kushner has to know, in theory, that Hamas is, it has been a bad actor, and that they can't, that if negotiating with them would be a non-starter in terms of the Israelis. So he's either doing this as a puff, just to look like they're making, they're doing this so that the UN and others can see it. Like, look, we tried to talk to Hamas and we made a deal with them and they broke it. So even if you put poison pills that make it impossible for them to keep. You can look at Trump's memorandum of understanding, the fort that Jared and Witkoff put together. Along with that scheme has to be the illusion of magnanimity and support. So the act of getting the hostages out and being hyper focused on doing that very thing could simply be, if we do this, then we can get away with this. That there's an element of Al Capone's orphanages about it. That if you're planning, you've got a strategy ahead of you that's multi-planned and is billions, if not, trillions down the line of money involved. Then in the short term, you can look like you're, everybody's happy. It's the same paranoia I have probably about him that people would have about Mamdani refusing to condemn, globalize the Intifada, is that it seems like a wolf in sheep's clothing if you don't trust it. And then, and I would argue that this is such a Gordian knot as far as ideology, ethnic and religious and tribal belief systems. The idea of a holy land, which persists in the mind of a lot of the actors, but also is used as a manipulation point for those who I do not believe view it as a strategic location more than a religious one in the Trump administration and elsewhere. That it has value for that purpose. That having an ally in that position where it is militarily is important.
There's also the historical connection between Judeo-Christian values and the founding of our own country. I mean, in many ways, we cannot forget about that. Part of the connection of the values that relate to American values and Judeo-Christianity, and the connection to Israel. All you got to do is look at the letters that George Washington wrote about the Jewish community, and you look at Thomas Jefferson and the connection. We talk about, what, Judeo-Christian values believe and how they are exercised in the state of Israel. The Puritans, came, they also spoke about the Promised Land. We talk about the connection between Israel and the United States. And so, I'm not here, the evangelical narrative has its own perception and religious interpretation as it relates to the Holy Land and the connection. But the fact of the matter is, one cannot ignore Judeo-Christianity values in our own country and how they are exercised and how they manifest themselves, in the connection, in the U.S.-Israel alliance, and how they play out together, and why people are supportive of that connection, just purely on a value-based issue. Now, there are obviously there are religious dimensions, there are cultural dimensions, but there are a lot of values that I think are relevant to why they're exercised in Israel. Not to mention the fact that many of the American values that we talk about and so much cherish are only exercised in the state of Israel. And so when people look and see where they can mirror in the Middle East a version of what an America looks like, all you got to do is look at a city like Tel Aviv and how it's similar to a city like New York or Los Angeles. So there is that connection that needs to be played out here. Now, Trump is indeed, fast forward to your earlier point, there is a transactional element to how Trump does business. Of course, he sees himself as the master of the art of the deal. I think it was challenging at best, to say the least, that you could try to connect as far as this, the synchronize, an Iran deal together with the expansion of the Abraham Accords. When you're looking at the actors to make that happen, everybody's been looking at Saudi Arabia as a potential, ally that could expand the Abraham Accords, but more problematic now, which of course the Saudis within their DNA always hedge, as far as hedging their bets. I mean, so the fact that they're signing on to a Mecca agreement that includes Pakistan and Turkey, which is anti-American, is basically, to my mind, snubbing the Israelis in that regard, where there was discussion about expanding on all of that. And so these are the regional challenges that are playing out here. And there's also a religious dimension, of course, if you look at the conflict at the war with Iran, which also hits on the largest cleavage between Sunnis and Shiites. And so, how those threats are interpreted by the many other actors in the region is another dimension here. And so, we also have to look at that as well. And so,
Okay.
there are many moving parts of
that. I would agree that, I think that's one of the reasons why the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular, and the region itself over time, because of not only the multiple layers that exist philosophically, religiously, nationally, rule of law, and then the resource issues of the Middle East writ large. The intertwining of all those things allows for sort of a minutia-based conversation that can spiral off, no matter who is talking about it, into whatever their particular bias is. And there are only a few areas where the mechanical reality sits. Israel exists as a country right now. Period. End of story. The Gaza territory and the West Bank exist as material legal entities right now. That's just true. Who runs them? All that kind of stuff. That's where you start running into the other aspects of things. Israel is having an election right now specifically about that. Gaza will have to either have their own intifada internally or not, because one of the great examples is, and maybe you can help define for me a little bit of what you see as Zionism, because I would argue that there are bifurcations and trifurcations of Zionism in its definition, depending on who's using it. Joe Biden versus, somebody writing an article about it in 1937. There's kind of a difference in how people view that. And in even Intifada, like globalize the Intifada. Intifada can mean uprising, which sounds generally okay when the people are put down and there wants to be. It can have both communist alignments and a youth alignment. The uprising is kind of is a comfortable word. It's like revolution has become a comfortable word with a lot of folks, but it also means shaking off. And the shaking off part is the part that is part of like shaking off like a bad case of fleas, which is the idea that kill the leadership and our overlords, shake them off. The entire world that exists above us must be shattered and shaken off. And that's where you get into the French Revolution kind of idea as a shaking off instead of an uprising. That a revolution at one point can split into, hey, like the United States. We fought our war with these guys, but we're not hunting down people inside our own territory anymore. We're trying to work it out amongst each other. We have states' rights. We're going to break this out. We're going to have a federalized system. That was an uprising. The revolution in the United States became an uprising. The shaking off is what is happening in Sudan, or arguably happened in the Soviet Union, or Mao's Great Leap Forward, and those kind of things. And those have terrible implications. The problem is anybody using the term can kind of pick or choose. And the same thing I think is true of Zionism. I think a lot of people use it as a placeholder for Israel should have the right to exist and defend itself. Period.
So
other folks, though, and then the extreme of it would be what Tucker Carlson and others have been talking about lately is the greater Israel theory, which is not only does Israel have the right to exist, but Zionism gives us the right to expand and take Jordan and Lebanon and northern Egypt and almost to a point where it becomes the Ruski Mir idea, the Russian world. Like once we put our toe on it, it's ours. That's been pushed through Russia's been saying that for quite a long time. They say it all the time now, especially about Ukraine and Estonia and those other countries. So there's a fear
Look,
of that rolling, slippery slope.
you can make the same argument about the fact that in Muslim Sharia law, any land that
Sure.
is Muslim is Muslim land in perpetuity.
Sure.
But let's go about terminology for a second.
Sure.
The beauty of the Arabic language, which has been, lost in translation and misinterpreted by others because it can be, interpreted in many ways. Arafat like to talk about the fact that jihad is spiritual yoga, and the fact that he used the same imagery that you use, that intifada is exactly the movement that the dog makes when he tries to get rid of the tick. What is not interpreted is the fact that intifada and mukawama movements, which are resistance organizations, have always had a violent, terroristic, and nihilistic narrative incorporated in them. And when he talks about the tick, he talks about the fact that in the same narrative that Jews and Christians are sons of pigs and monkeys that deserve death. And so the understanding of the element of the terroristic, Islamist, and nihilistic narrative that is incorporated in Intifada is not just a matter of exercising resistance or revolution. That's part of where I was getting at before, that has been triggered words and phrases that have been interpreted by the Soviets, that have been interpreted into the Western zeitgeist, to allow them to kind of soft pedal their true meanings. And so I just want to be clear, to my mind,
But doesn't that water down, real quick, doesn't that water down the meaning of the thing itself? Because we've dealt with this, in like the Christian right for a long time, that they're obviously, their idea of family values, they opened it up so much that, that they had Dennis Hastert, and then now they've elected Donald Trump. The idea is that anybody who uses the phrase is on our side, but eventually that phrase loses all its meaning if you spread it out too thin across a group of people. It's not like you can just snatch it back and have that pure meaning. That's one of the struggles of, I would argue, the far left and the far right in this country, is that the Nazi sympathizers on the Nick Fuentes side and the sort of neo-communist fascist sympathizers on the far left. The problem is they can use words like revolution and all that kind of stuff, and they mean it. But by the time it trickles down in the infotainment sphere that we all live in, they can't go, all right, now, brothers and sisters, pick up your knives and go out into the streets. And everybody's like, what are you fucking talking about? That's not what, we're not interested in that at all. I'm not going to do that. I'll watch, but.
Right. Well, that's part of the lost in translation. In the Islamist narrative, these terms are not debatable. They're not debatable. When you use the frame, and I don't think that Mamdani.
I agree, but they become debatable when you use them with other people. That's their problem in that regard.
He knows exactly what he's saying by that, and not to mention the fact that globalizing Intifada in our own very country here had violent connotations. The killing of 2 Israeli staffers in Washington. When you're talking about what happened, in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. When you're talking about the Hezbollah attack in Dearborn, Michigan. I mean, these terms actually have military, violent, terroristic, and nihilistic connotations, and so and they've been used in the streets of New York, LA, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, everywhere, and so. That's part of where the religiosity, where they don't debate these terms, using the interpretation or the translation of these terms as resistance, as shaking off, that waters the term down, and that legitimizes them. And that takes away from the true from the true meaning of what these words actually means. If you talk to Islamist movements around the world, they don't debate any of this terminology. It is a completely binary understanding of how this plays out. In the same way that the attackers of 9/11 here, we're about to mark 25 years since 9/11, when they use the terminology of jihad, and when you read the writings of bin Laden, it was very clear how, from their narrative, from their perspective, how the West represents a threat to their way of life. As a result of that, we need to act in this fashion. That is a very clear interpretation. Now, just going back to your point about Zionism, to my mind, is Jewish nationalism, it's Jewish peoplehood. It's about the extension of the fact that you have a land, you have a nationality, you have a country. That is the and to that end, the creation of the modern state of Israel is basically exercising that right of Jewish nationalism, like every other country around the world, to have a state for their own Jewish peoplehood. Jewish, that's what it means. The interpretation of the Carlsons of the world, of the fact that Zionism has this magnanimous narrative to replace other people and to kind of take it and to kind of change that is propaganda. I mean, there is enough propaganda where you had in the pre-state era in the 1930s and 1940s, where Arab voices were saying, Jews came to a vassal land and there were no inhabitants in the area and they basically eradicated the area. That was not the case. We have historical documentation, and the proof is actually this is the most important proof of all of that reality, that Jews turn to their Arab neighbors and say, don't wage war on us, stay. And so if you look at the reality of 1948, those Arabs who stayed in the land are Arab Israelis, are naturalized citizens of the state of Israel, who get elected in the Israeli parliament, who get elected to become judges in the state of Israel. So, I mean, one needs to understand, where you can coexist and work together, this idea. But where I take issue, and this goes back to the earlier, points that we started our conversation today, is the fact that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, how they have been, brought into the coalition of these terms together, and how people like Candace Owen and AOC and Carlson and others are basically using every anti-Semitic trope to incorporate the fact that Zionism is the evil, and the root cause of all problems. Right. And what they like to say, or to kind of skirt the issue, which is, again, to my mind, a fallacy, is that they will say, you know what? I don't hate Jews. My best friends are Jews. I mean, Mark Ruffalo tried to do the same thing the other day. I have a problem with Zionists because Zionists, they're racist. And Zionism is racism, and Zionism is Nazism. But if you test this out and to actually see what they're actually saying, I would argue that the contemporary anti-Zionist narrative is analogous 100% to anti-Semitism, which is racism. And so the fact of the matter is,
well, that's all right. So I totally hear where you're coming from. I will push back in one area, in that Ruffalo, for example, I know only to be a well-meaning human being, and it would be one of those situations where his interpretation of what that word means might be taken as extreme compared to other people's interpretations of it. But it's the things itself, not the word, that he has a problem with. And I think when he probably, and this, I can't speak for him, but this is in general where I see a lot of this going, is that I hear a lot of people who are against Zionism specifically. What they're largely focusing on is not the existence of Israel as it exists today, or did for a while, but say what settlers do in the West Bank, or what they see as Netanyahu's expansionist ideas, and again, the Greater Israel concept, that some of those folks align themselves with, that this isn't, in the same way that we have a problem with Donald Trump trying to turn the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America and claim Canada and Greenland and Venezuela as the 51st through 3rd state, as this imperialist concept. We're against that at our root, and that would be, I think, where he's coming from. I don't know that, I certainly don't see him as somebody who dislikes, hates, or is derogatory towards Jews over the course of his life or career. I've never seen evidence of that. I'm not close friends with the guy, but that's one of those things. And I think that's what I mean when the Gordian knot of these issues has so many areas where the terminology itself can spin up a conversation that goes beyond the actual circumstance and wants of the people, the human beings involved in the conversation itself, that we end up having arguments about the value of, or the implicit purity of, the terminology. instead of the goals set forth. And that's where it gets gray, and that's where it's hard to have that conversation. You can't put that conversation on a bumper sticker. And when it comes to, and I know we're running out of time, so this, and we're never going to, I'm glad we get to have this conversation, because I do think it's important to see this conversation in full view. That my feelings about the Judeo-Christian nature of the United States, for example, is much seated in the hidden paganism of Europe and the adaptation of Christianity as it moved north, and the sort of adaptation of the polytheistic religions, which is where you get the Catholic Church's saints, and where you get, those are all kind of their variants on what would effectively moment. Well, there it is, it's back, there we go. So I don't know how much of that you heard. You okay? Can you hear me now? It'll take a
I can
second.
hear you now, but I lost you there.
Yeah, so I would argue that the overlap between what effectively is the deists that started the United States, who primarily believe in in religious secularism, this belief that quote, everyone is welcome to their own unique mistake, entitled to their own unique mistake, in terms of you can't fit God, the corpus callosum of a human being. That from that, they incorporated a lot of polytheistic religious aspects of European culture, but on the down low, because the kings of the time had squeezed that through the monotheistic ideas that had come out of the Abrahamic traditions, and that would be the Catholic saints being basically cookie cutters for Roman gods and the pagan gods themselves as they kind of move through the north. That's that adaptation. And our deists who created the country, again, eliminated 5 of the 10 commandments in the First Amendment. You do not have to legally honor your father and mother. You don't have to. You can take the Lord's name in vain. You can have any god you want. These are, and don't get me started on the bifurcation of the other ones. Stealing and murder have, obviously we have myriads of different gradations of killing in self-defense and war and all that stuff, which existed in scripture across a lot of different religions. So that root is there, certainly a little bit, but the relationship, unfortunately, is being played up by the Trumps and Kushners of the world, which I think makes it a villain because of its alignment. That I think there are a lot of people who had issues maybe over the years with how much support we give to Israel financially, because they don't want us to have public schools in the United States. So they certainly don't want us handing out money to any other country. And other folks who may have had anti-Semitic views. But those made strange bedfellows on a very narrow point for a little while. But Donald Trump, in many ways, has managed, in his expansionist idea of his own family's empire post-presidency, and his alignment with the Saudis, and therefore his idea that eventually he could have a Trump Tower Tehran if he eventually could just make a transactional relationship with those folks possible, is the part we're dealing with right now. Is that we are, you've got a religious group, deep believers mixed with territorial identity and resource-based economics, all overlapping, and you've got a transactional president and his operatives manipulating all of those sides to as almost a criminal enterprise.
Okay, but let's also, putting aside Trump for a second, let's also not forget what I was saying before was the historical connection that Americans have. And this was historically a bipartisan issue, and if you look at a generational narrative like a Steny Hoyer or a Joe Biden, who've had support for the state of Israel because of how they were raised within the Democratic Party, because these were extension of values. Evangelicals are a category, but I'm saying that there is an historical, even in our own country, as far as the founding fathers and the connection to Judeo-Christian values and how our country mirrors and the ongoing connection between Israel and in the United States. And so there's a long history to all of that in a bipartisan way as far as those connection issues of money and support. Aid to Israel, in contrast to any other country, actually goes back into our own economy to develop it and actually, create jobs in the United States and funds industries here that are basically being used to save Americans' lives, overseas and
Yeah,
around the world.
I think the bigger
And
ties. I think it's a good point, but the bigger ties between Israel and the United States have a lot to do more with pharmaceutical advancements and technological and engineering
it
relationships
goes both
than they
ways.
do
Yeah,
with
sure.
anything else. Right.
Look, talk about, look, during the startup, peak, a lot of the R&D was based in Israel, as far as like, what's going on. I mean, this is what it was a
Hmm.
good economic investment for Americans. It had, there was a return on investment when it comes to that regard. But I mean, look, just going back to the, I know we're short on time, but just
Yep.
going, on the point, look, Ruffalo,
Yeah.
is not a Middle East expert. Throwing out terminologies on these issues and attacking, the Ellisons and using kind of anti-Semitic tropes. Maybe what he meant, what he didn't mean. And trying to kind of skirt the issue and say, well, I have many Jewish friends. I didn't really mean that. But the fact that they're adopting hook, line, and sinker terminology as it relates to Gaza as genocide and apartheid, and immediately, when even the United Nations came out today saying there's no such thing that took place here,
Right.
buying into this kind of propaganda is problematic. You want to actually go see what's going on the ground, actually go see what's going on the ground and understand
Hmm.
what actually took place there. But there is a propagandish narrative that has
Hmm.
basically been inserted into our zeitgeist, and that's part of
Yeah.
the problem. People are buying that without actually knowing what they're talking about.
Sure.
That's my
Sure.
problem.
I
And,
I I I, I
they're
hear you.
using and abusing,
Yeah.
and they're abusing their roles as actors. And when you have every actor on every Oscar award and every other else making these statements, and going back to our earlier point before the show started, when all the public executions were happening, in Iran, people who care so much about human rights, where was the outrage about that? You didn't see anything. You heard crickets on American college
Yeah,
campuses when it came to
that
Iran.
goes in line with what I agree, and I've had that issue about college campuses and care for Sudan. Again, as many people were killed in a weekend in Sudan as were killed in the Israeli-Palestinian war since October 7th, and yet it doesn't quite matter, and there's a myriad of reasons for that. But what I would argue is that one of the reasons why I think you heard crickets is because Donald Trump was looking and had been looking for a long time and spoke very openly about it as looking for an excuse after he bombed last year to go into Iran with a ground war. And the fear was anybody who starts calling that stuff out or siding with can be seen as siding with, well, action has to be taken. So now whatever Trump wants to do is justified. That is the corner I feel a lot of people feel like they're pinned in by when you have people like, and I would argue Netanyahu falls into this as well, and where Trump and Netanyahu, and I would argue Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and others, that when they start ideologically aligning themselves with a circumstance, a struggle, a breakout, whatever it is, everybody who is concerned about what they will use that for, not the struggle or the thing itself, but what they will use for their own benefit, becomes increasingly aligned. And that overlap is as much to blame, you can blame that as much on the leadership and how that leadership executes what it's planning on doing or its subverted plans. Like, again, I personally think Jared Kushner's up to no good. And I think he and Witkoff, arguably, Witkoff may have thought he was doing great work getting the hostages out, and thank God those folks are home and the bodies have returned home. But I don't think that was the end game for them, and I think it was, well, now we've got this card to play, and that's the increasing paranoia and skepticism that people have about certainly the Trump administration and its relationship with Netanyahu, and whether or not there are talks happening in good faith. So, like that is, I mean, we're at the end of it, but I appreciate you coming on because I know this is an important topic, and I like the fact that we're having it, and I'd love to have it again with you in the future. And I think there are a lot of parallels in that beyond the languaging of it. I think the goals that do overlap are, that it, like that that peace can exist for people who want to participate in peace. And that's one of the weird things that I think has been subverted, that I think you warn about in the normalization of Hamas and the normalization of, say, Qatar is a bad actor and the like, is that if you start playing this as everybody wants peace and pretending everybody does because you do, you set yourself up for it to be destroyed, taken away, or usurped or used
And
for
to
the
that end,
opposite.
we have to come to terms that there are people who don't believe in peace and don't believe in our values. It doesn't matter how much
Right.
money you're going to put on the table. I mean, we're
Right.
dealing with a nihilistic society which doesn't believe, and so they try to use any kind of subterfuge way to turn, And I would argue that
And
those
that
kind of sleeper cells exist in the United States. We're trying to turn America on its head, and so these are part of the problems that we're
agreed.
dealing with. But there has
Yep.
to be a deep dive into the reality of who we're dealing with, what the threats are, what the threat assessment looks like, and how to deal
Hmm.
with those problems. And I think that when it comes to the beginning of the war, when it came to Epic Fury, Israel and the United States were on the same page as far as dealing with the threats themselves. I think now that things have kind of shifted as far as the regional, at
Kinda.
large. But we have to deal with that reality. But the threat has not gone away. And what is still yet to be, and we can't forget, the threat of the highly enriched uranium, which is a major problem to the region at large.
Appreciate the conversation, Asaf. Thank you for coming on, and we'll talk to you again sometime soon. Be well.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Yep.
Cheers. Thank you. And I've got our whoop where there's it. Yeah, I got our dear friend Tara Devlin is waiting in the wings. I have no doubt chomping at the bit considering the conversation that we were having and that was going on. And I hope you guys can grasp where I'm going in this conversation is that I feel like that the reality of our current situation is being usurped by the very nature of our conversation about that reality. That it is that our where we are stagnant in our discussions or active in our discussions, we are stagnant in our accomplishments, and that by and large has a lot to do with how people will align themselves more with a word than an idea. And I hope that makes sense to some folks. Hold on one second. Let me I got one thing to fix right here. There we go. And I will bring in our dear friend Tara Devlin in 3, 2, 1. There she is. Excellent.
Am I here?
Yeah, you are.
Oh,
We hear you. Yep, I hear you.
hello.
Might take a
Okay.
moment. There you go.
I'm
Yeah.
gigantic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Sorry. Hold on. I can back you out. I might.
I look like,
Yeah. There you
it's
go. That's
like
better.
the incredible shrinking man. That's what you look like,
Right.
you know?
That's right.
Like I'm looking in the window. Oh my
So
good
yeah.
God.
So hi. I've talked to Asaf once before or whatever, and he's a clearly aligned with a very specific point of view. And I don't necessarily have fault with people who are
Mm,
legitimately aligned with that specific point of view. I don't have a problem with true believers because I want to hear them out. And
mm-hmm.
maybe it's the Libra in me, but I have a lot of actually and yeah buts in
Right.
my heart and soul where I'm like, I don't mind if you really believe what you believe. But if any of what you really believe is piggybacking on stuff that isn't necessarily the history or the current reality, then let's just remove
Yeah.
that. So then we can go, okay, actually, my beliefs, and this is how I like to live, my beliefs sit on principle, not on because my great
Mm,
grandparents put a flag someplace, right?
true.
And that
Yeah.
principle can stand up to any test because at its root, everybody, once you get down to it, you know, this constitutional idea that the founders put together, one
Mm,
of the reasons it resonates so easily, the idea of inalienable rights, all that stuff, is because if you put aside because I was standing here, that's why, God damn it, or because God
uh-huh.
told me so, or because
Yeah.
my skin is a certain color. Once you move past that point, everybody can agree with the principle underneath in theory that of just peaceful coexistence.
Mm,
But the
mm,
problem is if and this is Israel's cross to bear, ironically. I'm sorry about the mixed metaphor, but um, but the idea that it is founded both strategically and materially by an act in 1948,
Yeah.
and religiously based on an ethnic and religious concept going back a while, which is in competition with, and always has been, two other parallel tracks of the same religion. Don't even get me started on the Christianity out into evangelical to Lutheran to Catholic and Episcopalian and all that kind of stuff. The Protestant Reformation and the splitting up of that, and then the Catholic Church's way of handling that, which again was pagan in its root, which was create saints, so that maybe you don't maybe you're not really Jesus focused. That's too much Jesus for you, too much Mary. How about one of these other saints that you can focus on? He's the patron saint of police or engineering or writing or whatever. Well, Buddhism does the exact same fucking thing. If you go to China, what's left of the temples there that they haven't destroyed or turned into a Stuckies, there are Buddhas for everything that are focal meditation points, that kind of thing. All of that has been sucked up into the modern mishmash of religious iconography. And so that in and of itself is just that's why it's so hard to unpack for so many people, because it's not meant to be. It's a labeling exercise.
Yeah. You covered a lot of things there. My head was kind of smoldering, really, when I was listening to this. In fact, I was texting Andre. I was like, what's happening? Are they having an argument? Or I'm like...
I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to while having because I do think there's a depth of conversation that needs to be had there. And I think one of the problems is that we answer polarization with polarization as a knee jerk, right?
Right.
And
yes.
I'm curious. It's hard to kick the tires if you can't get on the lot. And a lot of times, what happens is the nature of having somebody like Asaf on or whatever to talk about these things is not primarily what I do on the show, obviously. But when it does happen occasionally, or we get a former Republican or somebody like that who still defends their quote unquote conservative bona fides, my problem with conservatives a lot of times, most of the time I would say, is that they're bullshitting about their values. There's nothing conservative. They don't conserve the environment. They don't conserve money. They certainly aren't protecting America. The idea that they're America first or MAGA is ridiculous. The idea that even that Bibi Netanyahu is a Zionist instead of just a materialist for his own power structure and an imperialist, ultimately trying to expand the borders of his country, which isn't that different from what Iran is allegedly doing with their people or what Donald Trump wants to do by usurping Venezuela and Greenland. They're the same kind of asshole. They just use a different term for it. So if you can get past, you can kick the tires on whether that term actually means something to them and what it actually means. It was I would say that was one of the curious answers and I don't want to speak off air with him, because we just had that conversation and I don't want to be like but his definition of Zionism predates the existence of, or the concept of the existence of Israel as a state. I think most of us view Zionism as Israel as a state, period. Right. But his was like, no, it's Jewish nationalism, no matter where they are. Which, if you listen to it, sounds like what Donald Trump often will throw out about, I think they're more, they care more about the other Jews than they care about America. It sounds very similar.
Right. I mean, this is really not my area of expertise because of this. No, but I mean, it's.
Well, it's nobody's. All right, I will say this. This is the thing. It's no one's area of expertise. That's why it's so fucked up.
Right.
That's exactly. You've stumbled on it. Tara Devlin, thank you for solving this mystery for all of us. Because
that's why I don't talk about it.
No one can be an expert on something with that many moving parts. It's just not fucking possible. And yet, it's a serious circumstance with serious implications. So it needs experts. And so experts will show up and they all have to put their fucking flag in one version of reality. And then it's this forever. And none of them know what the rest of it's about.
Yeah.
Oh
and
my
everybody
God.
has an agenda too.
Brilliant.
So like, thank you so much. Yes, but
Yeah.
like Netanyahu, I believe too. I mean, he's engaging in war crimes to
Yeah. He's
stay
an
out of
imperialist.
jail too.
He's a
Exactly.
classic imperialist. I would.
Yeah.
The weird part is that he gets to hide. He gets to cloak himself in Zionism or Christian, or
Yes.
the roots of Christianity and the religious
Yeah.
nature of the ground itself. But if that fucker was anywhere else,
Yeah.
it would just be the leader of the Sudanese army trying to push into Darfur and take
Yeah.
land, and fuck that guy, and
Right.
there'd be
Right.
UN resolutions, and most people would agree. But because
Yeah. And
of
then right.
this
Exactly.
Judeo-Christian concept, which I disagree with at its heart, and I hope I was articulate without being dismissive. You know, the neo-pagan roots of the United States as a secular religious or
Oh
country
God. Yeah.
is so much stronger. Don't get me started on Santa and the Easter Bunny. Right, and
Right.
Thanksgiving is like
Totally.
all of our holidays are
Saturnalia. Yeah.
yes,
I
our
prefer
days of the
Saturnalia.
week. Right.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Our fucking days of
Right.
the week. Moon Day, Sunday, Thor's Day,
Yeah.
for God's sake.
Freya's
Like,
Day. Freya's Day, huh?
yes. Right. Friday is Death's Day. And that's why it ended up being the weekend, because
Yeah.
it ended the
Yeah.
week because she dies and it's reborn in Saturn the
It's
next day.
interesting. Right. I love all that too. Just how the history, how it relates to history and connects, and how,
Yes.
yeah, it changed. Like the gods of one religion are become the demons of the next religion, and all that,
Right.
and how things evolve, language evolves. I love all that.
Oh,
But don't point it out to Christians, of course, especially these, the ones who
yeah.
think this is a Christian nation, and yeah, the Easter Bunny and the eggs and Santa Claus and all those traditions, how
Yeah.
they go back to Saturnalia too, even Santa's hat, Saturnalia,
Yeah.
which was the big holiday in Rome, which was when Rome went to I guess
Right.
Catholicism, when they had to change. It was a celebration of Saturn, the king of all the gods, and
Yeah.
if somebody had the honor of being like the mayhem person, and they would it look like a Santa hat, so you can tell,
Yeah.
oh, they're the ones who's yeah. So it all
And
connects,
exactly. And what you do is, whenever you roll into an area, and this is kind of what I was getting with the whole like globalize the Antifada from the river to the sea, those kind of free
Oh
Palestine,
God.
those kind of languaging.
Yes.
When that languaging in means a totally different thing in in Afghanistan than it does in the streets of New York. Now, there might
Mm-hmm.
be people in the group in New York who mean it the same way the people in Afghanistan mean it. There's nobody in Afghanistan that means it the way the rest of the people in the streets of New York mean it. Like, there's just
Yeah.
not. And that watering down ultimately, it has. You might think it's spreading your religion everywhere. You might
Yeah.
think it's spreading your message and your ideology. But ultimately, if you try to snap it back to the orthodoxy and make everybody behave, all right, well, anybody who's saying globalize the Intifada or free Palestine, automatically you guys have to live under
Yeah.
Sharia law today. It doesn't fucking happen. They all go, fuck that, and they walk away. It's, it's a little bit like Occupy Wall Street and the people that gather around Occupy Wall Street, and you're like, largely an anti kind of bailout and corporatism idea, not an anti-capitalist movement, not an anti-market. So we don't want the country to run a different way. And when it threatened to be that way, it ate itself. Like, the people fought amongst themselves and it collapsed, like the Chop and the Chaz in Seattle. Like, and that's because different words mean different things to different people. And when you boil it down to the principle, you're like, oh, wait, okay, what do we agree on in principle? Sorry, I'm so wound up from that conversation.
It's fine.
Obviously,
It's fine. But it does, and like we're saying, it all connects, because you talk about Occupy Wall Street too, and this is what it sounds like with your conversation you were just having. That there's that's what I believe killed Occupy Wall Street too. They try to be all things to all people too. So they had all these they came up with this mission statement that had everything in it, from free Mumia to save the whales. It was like ridiculous. There was no, and it just seems like what we're talking about here too. There's just so much. There's so many pieces here, and everyone has their agenda. And
Right.
I mean, what does it really boil down to? I guess and like your guest has his agenda, and
Right.
Bibi Netanyahu has that. I mean and I can
But there's
understand it's just like
I think, yeah, this
insanity.
goes to the sort of the rise of the DSA thing right now. And I would argue
Mm-hmm.
DSA has a lot if you look at their website and their,
Yeah. Oh
their
God, yeah.
languaging, yeah, it's a
No,
lot like
yeah.
the Occupy
Yeah.
Wall Street stuff. The
Yes,
more you read it, the
exactly.
nuttier it is.
The-
But the people,
I
yeah,
know. I am a card carrying member of DSA, and I'm so annoyed right now. I just joined the
right.
DSA, but
Uh,
they're embarrassing. I mean, years ago, so and they're just embarrassing that
right.
and this is what I'm saying. It's like the Occupy Wall Street movement. You don't go on TV and say, "Yeah, abolish the Senate, no borders." I mean, that was like the Occupy Wall Street thing. It was like all these
Yes.
stupid juvenile ideas that will never happen. No, we're not going to
Why?
abolish the Senate. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen.
My big question on the okay, so let's kind of chip away at each one of these because I addressed their like freedom for all incarcerated people, which I was like, why do you want every rape victim in this country to be
Exactly.
in their own prison? Because
It's
women
ridiculous.
everywhere, you're gonna. I'm dead serious. You're gonna release
Hmm.
every rapist. You're just gonna let them
Yeah,
out because
serial
the
killers
system.
is that include
Everybody.
BTK killer and
Yeah. Ghislaine Maxwell, everybody,
right,
you're all out.
right.
Right.
Chris Watts, right, Family
Yeah.
Annihilator.
Koberger, right. Like you're just going to, because in the name, which by the way, sounds like, the right wingers, when they yell freedom and you're like,
Oh
all right,
yeah.
dipshit,
Oh God.
obviously we have managed freedom in this country because
Uh-huh.
I would
Uh-huh.
argue that machine guns are to the Second Amendment what child porn is to the First. Like, there's limits that have
Yeah.
to exist or you
Yeah.
don't have a society. So fuck
Right.
off with your just yelling freedom. You don't want
Yes.
gays to get married. You don't think that freedom should exist. So
Yeah.
shut the fuck up.
Exactly.
But you're
Right.
using that word. The DSA folks are using the word the same fucking way. And
Yeah.
you're like,
It's
what
awful.
in the world? And somebody said it's no privately owned prisons not abolished. No, it isn't. On their website, I read it the other day. It's freedom for all incarcerated
Oh,
people.
Jesus
It's
Christ.
the ending of prisons, period. Not
Yeah.
for-profit prisons,
Oh,
not state prisons, not federal prisons, and only states should be able to do it, or states shouldn't be
Oh
allowed to
boy.
do it, only the federal government.
Ugh.
It's in there. It's on their abolitionist page, which is all the things they demand be abolished.
Oh God, it's so come
Yeah.
on. This is what I'm talking
So,
about. Like, can't we
right,
focus on like universal health care, living
right,
wages, things
right.
like that people want, and that's why I joined the DSA.
Right.
Like I'm thinking about the Scandinavian model of government where we have a capitalist system, I guess, but it's
Mhm.
highly regulated and there's a strong social safety net. That's it. Period. Leave no
Yeah.
one behind. We're in this together. Let's build a society that works for all. But we're not going. Yes, there's a lot of problems with the prison system, and that's one of them. But you don't respond to that by abolishing prisons. I mean, that's just so
Right.
ridiculous.
Somebody,
And
by the way,
yeah,
can I just say somebody was like, apparently, let's see if I can make sure you're in here. If I switch this over, yeah, this is the DSA
oh,
website.
geez.
This is their abolition working group. I didn't make this up. I read this the other day on the air. We went through this DSA political platform, and right here, freedom for all incarcerated people, not people
Oh,
incarcerated for
Jesus Christ.
like, yeah,
Not even like an asterisk, like
none,
except serial
none.
killers, right?
And then eventually zero policing.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. That was the other thing
Yeah.
that was with Occupy Wall Street too. They had the same
Right.
mission statement. One was like abolish police, and that's why the Republicans keep bringing up the defund the police, defund the police. They talk about it more than Democrats do, of course, because we
Right.
don't say defund the
No.
police. The system, it is defund community policing. That is the message. That's what they were talking about. And of course,
yes.
Republicans.
Well, at the end of that, it's weird. At the end of that, in the DSA political platform about their abolition stuff that I was just putting up, the last one is invest in community self-governance and care, not cops. Okay, and I think most of us read that as where in the same area like defund the police. What if I may speak on behalf of my kooky DSA friends standing over here screaming at the meeting, what they really mean is how about we send mental health professionals to somebody who's having a mental breakdown instead of cops, so they end up killing themselves, and that's where I think most of us react to that, and that is completely within the realm of reality and making that happen. And in certain cities, they have increased that, and it's and in areas, some areas it's worked, and some pilot areas it hasn't. This is like the libertarian. This is DSA is basically left-wing libertarianism, and and libertarians on their website at one point have this like decriminalize all drugs. Well, there's some people in that, I think, who go, people shouldn't be in jail for being addicts. And when you hear decriminalize all drugs, that's what I hear. And what most of us hear, like, you shouldn't go to jail for it. You should have to get help if you harm somebody else. Yeah. If you're on drugs when you kill somebody, you still go to jail for killing them, but maybe you mitigate the sentence because you weren't yourself, and with treatment, maybe there's a chance you could go back into society versus somebody who thought it through for years and wasn't high at the time, right? That seems to be mechanically reasonable as a conversation. But what libertarians literally mean, especially the Ron Paul crowd, is that, hey, man, if we decriminalize all of it, these junkies will just fucking die. Just let them have it for a while, and then we'll snap it back when it's our kids. We'll beat the snot out of our kids for using drugs. We won't decriminalize it in our households. We'll be, authoritarian and control them, or, we can afford to send them to rehab. But the junkies and their kids, I mean, it's the passive eugenics is what Carlin used to call it.
Yes. Well, and of course they want all the benefits of society, just not for the people that they hate or want to exploit. So yes, of course, if their kids were on drugs, they would definitely have resources, and they take care of them. But it's everybody else can go eat cake, I suppose, right?
Right.
And, go die, really.
Yeah. Don't get sick and die early.
Don't get sick, right? And if you do,
and if you die quickly, right. Which is that is the Trump plan ultimately.
It is, and it's happening now. I mean, now more than 10 million Americans don't have health care anymore, and it's the first time since Obamacare that health insurance is going down in the country, and people are showing up once again at the emergency room when they have no other option, when it's too late. Which is exactly why we needed reform to begin with. And I mean, it's just they're so disgusting. I'm just, it's so vile, evil. It really is evil. And when I had Olivia Troy on the show, and I mentioned her because when she was running for Congress, she ran on a campaign of standing up to evil. And I asked her why did she use that word? I use that word. It's such a strong word. And she said, because it's the appropriate word. And because she saw them from the inside, that this is who they are. They don't care about the American people. They don't care who they hurt. They don't care. They're not thinking about saving lives or making America great even. They're great for them. Great for them. They are thinking about how to steal more, how to feather their own nests. They don't care who dies. So, and as we such proof of it every single day in this country, as they get away with more and more crimes against I don't fathom it when they say, Trump has a low approval rate, like 33% or whatever it is. It's going lower and lower. Who are these 33%? That's the real.
Well, I would argue my girl has a like Facebook reaction channel that she does. Summer Lovin', people know about it, but she covered a lady recently who owned a Trump store in Florida. She got pulled over by the police, and it's a body cam reaction that she did of this body cam of this woman who owns a Trump store in Florida. and she's got Trump earrings and a Trump phone cover, and she's got a Trump hat on, and she's got Trump stuff on her dash, and she's got a little Trump bobblehead, and she's got Trump seat covers and whatever. Holy shit. Anyways, her license is expired. Her car wasn't registered. She thought she could go to the front of the line because her Trump stuff is her license in this. And there's an alignment of, and maybe this is the horseshoe world of like, the accelerationists, let it all burn down because we'll build a utopia in its, in its ash from its ashes. And the right wingers who think that, we need a monarchy in this country and the Trump family are that. That 33% are like what Trump is doing. But that doesn't necessarily mean they like why he's doing it. You know what I mean? If you own a house and you want to burn it down for the insurance, and you're a person down the street who hated the house because it was an eyesore, you could both be happy the house is on fire, but you have very different reasonings for being happy about it. And the aftermath in that circumstance will be very different. Right. And that's the issue I have with, like, when we were talking about Jared Kushner meeting with the Hamas leader, or even meeting with Hakeem Jeffries.
Exactly. Like, yes.
I don't trust that guy.
I wrote an article. No.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I wrote an article on Political Voices Network. It just went up actually about this, about Hakeem Jeffries meeting with Jared Kushner. And CNN reported it. They used the appropriate word, looking for ways to collaborate. Of course, collaborate with Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner, and of course the whole Trump maladministration. Jared Kushner's not an elected anything. He is not a cabinet member. He is the president's son-in-law. It's such a disgrace that if Hakeem Jeffries would validate that with his presence. And you collaborate on what? This is a maladministration that is destroying the grand experiment. So what are you going to find common ground with?
Well, okay, so because of his position, I tried to work this out in my head too, as to what the collaboration will be. And I feel like Jared called it to some degree, but I don't know. It seems to make sense that who set the agenda, or somebody who said yes first, whatever, who blinked first. But clearly Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are the people who are, in theory, engaging with the Iranians and the Israelis and whoever's the Hamas leadership in Gaza and whoever else, the fucking Abraham Accords crowd, whoever the fuck they're talking to. They are the point person. And so if you listen to Trump, we've all been listening to Trump talk about what's going on with Jared and Steve Witkoff in these meetings. I don't think he's telling the truth ever, but I certainly don't in this circumstance. I don't know that you could get a real, like, if you wanted to know what's actually fucking happening in that room, what is going on? What's going on with Iran? Are we ever getting close? Who are the fuck are you talking to? Who is this meeting's with? And in theory, if these were members of the cabinet, the Congress could call them. The House obviously is in Republican hands, so they're not going to do it. They would call Jared Kushner in and say, hey, we're going to have a public hearing. Right. What are you telling these people, and what the fuck are they telling you?
Right.
But what Republicans run things into it.
Right.
So from a Jeffrey standpoint, if I were he, and there was a reasoning behind why I would meet with Jared Kushner, it would be that. Like, who the fuck are you talking to? What did they actually say? How do we know where is this going? Because the the Republicans are not going to call you in. And that doesn't mean I believe him when he tells me. Right. But I would, whatever he tells me, we take over, we get the House. Yeah. In theory, I'm going to call him in and see if what he said before and what he says now matches. That's going to be a big part of it, right?
That could be, but what they're reporting, he didn't dispute this, but all they reported was that they were finding common ground, how they could work together. Work together on what? I'm so sick of that too. On the corporate media, you'll hear them say, "Oh, we're going to reach across the aisle to get things done." What things? Can we get a specific here? because you're working together with people or getting things done with a group of people that thinks this con man is, this criminal con man deserves to run rampant through our system like a smash and grab, like he's on friggin' supermarket sweep. So what are you getting done as the American people? The economy sucks for the American people, and they fall lower and lower on the ladder, and lifelines are cut. We know how hard it is out there for people. So what are you getting done with people who don't believe in
oddly enough,
the general welfare? So
the Road to Housing Act, the bipartisan housing bill that went through, again, because Republicans are in control of things,
Right.
because voters gave them that control, they have more leverage in this situation. But it was
Yes.
it was bipartisan. It got, nearly everybody was on board with the work, because there's only so many solutions to some problems. Again, the Gordian knot of Israeli-Palestinian politicking and whether or not Russia's going to get out. Like, you can fucking Comic-Con yourself into a corner and yammer about could Hulk beat up Superman forever. But when it comes to housing in this country, there's a finite amount of resources. There's a finite number of people in the country relative to population. There's a finite number of homeless people. There's a finite number, and it might be a rolling number, but you can ease that rolling number in waves. And there's a strategy. And when you, in a jump ball, Republicans and Democrats, whether they like it or not, the solution's going to be very similar.
That's right.
There really is only one answer.
100%. You're right. It's like Jeffries when he was on Meet the Press, and he said he doesn't believe in Medicare for all now. He doesn't support it, and he wants to come up with solutions. We're going to figure things out. You don't have to figure it out. It's been figured out. It's Medicare for all. It's everyone in, nobody out. Like, you don't have to create a system like Obamacare that is so expensive and has so many pieces to it that Republicans can destroy. And that's what they did. They took out all of the mechanisms in Obamacare that made it affordable. And it drives me crazy that the Democrats don't point that out. You know what I mean? It's just like, I can only do so much on my little podcast, Tara Buster, it's like, but they are constantly blaming Democrats for the fact that Obamacare, that healthcare is so expensive. Well, that's because the Republicans removed all the mechanisms in Obamacare that was supposed to make it affordable, like the mandate, like the risk pools, like the subsidies, and more. So when you do that, it's going to be expensive because it's for-profit healthcare, which shouldn't exist anyway. But that's why, Hakeem Jeffries going on Meet the Press and acting like there's some, like you're saying, Gordian knot here about healthcare. How do we fix it? How do we make it affordable? How do we, it's the whole world figured it out. I don't know. Look around. Where we stand alone here with the most expensive. It is twice as expensive, leaves millions out, bankrupts millions, kills thousands. No other industry would be allowed to run like that if they killed 51,000, needlessly killed. Now, it used to be 35, now it's 51 and going up. I mean, no other industry would be allowed except for the for-profit health system. So
there's a lot of there's a huge chunk of the country that is and likes the idea of a universal system, but not if it eliminates private insurance as a supplement. But Medicare for all does that. It's the only way it can operate, is that if it's not, ironically, if there's in the same way that I would argue private insurance long-term can't compete if you have a Medicare for all kind of system, even if it was allowed to exist, and it would wither naturally in theory, but for some extended stuff, which is why they fight it. But on the other hand, Medicare for all doesn't exist in terms of the tax base in the same way that we have public schools in this country, and you constantly have Republicans who, even though they were raised in and went to public schools and are like, public schools crank out morons, and you're like, you went to public school, dummy. Like, okay, that's always a running thing that they never seem to mix on. I mean, obviously Tucker Carlson and people like that send their kid to private schools, so they shit on the public school system, but their kids end up being dipshits, ironically enough. Eric and Don Jr. are morons and went to private schools, right?
So is Donald. So is Donald. I mean, come on.
Right. Exactly. So private versus public is, I would argue that both should be allowed to exist fully. And if you can't compete with a public good, if you can build a highway cheaper and faster that replaces it, and you can zone it through other people, and you can get everybody's buy-in, then you could replace the federal highway going through your city, as a city, knock yourself out. We built it around, and then we just bifurcated everything. They do that with junctures in cities like Austin and stuff, where they got those big squirrely things. That's what that is. That's the city itself saying our private industry here needs it to go a different way than the federal government does. So we're going to mess with it a little bit, and here we go. And you should be allowed to do that. And we have public schools and private schools. The problem is that the people who are for private schools eventually think they're going to put public schools out of business, and the people who are for public schools, are fine with private schools existing by and large. They just shouldn't be necessary to get a decent education. Call me crazy. But with Medicare for All, the existence of it and the structure of it and the way the bills have been crafted so far is that it calls for an immediate taxation base to get it started, to pay for it in the short term for the next 25 years. You're going to have to jack taxes around it on payroll taxes, income tax, probably a VAT or a sales tax on top of that. But again, per person, that works out way better. But again, we're not talking about reality here. We're talking about perception. So there's a big chunk of the public that just isn't for it because you hate the devil, or whatever. Like they look at certain European countries, England, sometimes Canada, big wait times for surgery. A lot of times it's elective. That's the other thing that they don't talk about, so that you get in line behind people who need emergency surgery, you'd think you would, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you have an I just know people that have experienced that. I
of course,
personally, but a friend of mine almost chopped off his arm in Italy, and he didn't have to wait around for surgery. So
right, yeah. And most of the time, by the way, emergency surgery is as such. It's just not. They don't view cancer surgery as emergency surgery, even though you've got cancer growing inside you. It's not, there's certain, and again, that has to be worked out in a Medicare for All situation in the same way that you work it out by choosing, if your insurance didn't cover it and that became the news and somebody did that. If insurance fucked somebody like that, you wouldn't sign up with Allstate if they had done that to somebody who needed emergency liver surgery. You go, I'm going with somebody else. And that's part of the sales pitch. That's the democratization of that choice, even in the situation where you have to pay for it. The issue that, I think a lot of Democrats are for, at least in what I can work out, is that I think where Obamacare was eventually moving towards single payer, and then the power of single payer would be seen by the consumer and the citizenry as being superior. In the same way that you had a bunch of maggots with their tricorn hats stand out there, get your government hands off of my Medicare, right?
Exactly.
Eventually, they don't even realize. They don't even realize that they are
messaging problem,
right? Yeah, yes, exactly. So part of the issue is that how do you convince those people that they should be for a single payer system where the government is the single payer of choice? If they automatically reject Medicare for All because it means the elimination of all other insurance except for cosmetic surgery and maybe some dental surgery or some shit like that, and higher taxes at the same time, which would be instantly disruptive, and it would have to happen very quickly. It happened in England because of the war, but like, how do you introduce that?
You message it, and in fact,
I agree.
All over the world, people, these private systems, they still exist. You could universal healthcare doesn't mean banning private insurance, and many countries, like, they guarantee a core package of care, like Obamacare is regulating, right? But they still allow people to buy private insurance for extras, like lower out-of-pocket
but Medicare for All, technically speaking, Medicare for All, at least is how it's been previously drafted, would not. And it's the same way, like, if you look at Trump RX, which is hilarious and bullshit.
It is a bullshit site.
If you'll notice, the coupons they give you for your cut rate drugs that basically give you the same price as good RX, and you're supposed to take it to the pharmacy.
It is,
but
good,
it says
good RX.
Right. But it says in the fine print, and we looked at this when it first launched, and I've shown it a couple times. It says if you're on any other government program, Medicare, you're a vet, you're in any other kind of, you've got government health care as an employee of the federal or state government, you don't qualify. You don't get those breaks. And why is that?
Yeah.
Well, partly because the system itself
That's right.
can, in some cases, buy these drugs in bulk to lower the costs. And in some cases, there's a law against them doing it, which Republicans have put in, right? And so in the instance of the existence of how Medicare got drafted initially in the first part, one of the reasons how it got through the Republicans who were calling it communism back in the day was that if it interfered with the private industry of insurance and stuff like that, then it had to cease to exist, and they couldn't live both together, right? And so it was written into the law to basically they could see this coming. They could see, like, if Medicare works, everybody's going to want to be in Medicare, and so they drafted it in such a way that you couldn't. You'd have to create a whole new thing, and so even though we might call it Medicare for all, we were literally going to have to come up with another name for it. We're legally, because of how it's drafted and how this wall was built by the Reaganites. You know that old Ronald Reagan record that when they would say Medicare and Medicaid are socialism. They'd play that record at little coffee clatches.
Oh yes,
yeah,
right. That's what Reagan said. If we pass Medicare, we will have to tell our grandchildren about a time when men were free, right? I mean, that lives literally on the record. We'll have to look back. Like, everything it's such a dire, it's life or death, right? But it literally is life or death. And the right wingers, and the insurance companies, they were happy to get rid of older people anyway. So that made it easier, because older people, they require more health care and they don't want to pay. So they, have it. So take them.
I don't know if you will remember this. Anytime you're like, when they're throwing around fucking socialized, whatever, let's be abundantly clear. Socialized medicine, specifically, in deference to our dear friend Tara, who is a card-carrying member of the DSA.
The DSA, yes. Except I do not endorse the stupidity. Okay.
Yes, right.
I don't.
Well, okay. I hear you. But in this particular instance,
yes, I think
there
Chris
is
Watts
nothing
should be in jail. Right.
For the record, and in direct response to this bullshit from Ronald Reagan back in the day, there is nothing socialist about Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. Nothing. And again, this goes towards what's a social democrat versus a democratic socialist. And a social democrat is just somebody who shows where their democratic taxation priorities are on social programs and building up the country. In many ways, the social democrats of Northern Europe are the Sweden first crowd, ironically enough. They think, why should we be worrying about other countries? We should be building up a social structure for our own people. Some of them even are leaning into the anti-immigrant stuff that's now. So let's, and again, there's a thin line between national socialist and democratic socialist if your country's a democracy and you're just using that languaging. And there's also a lot of gross people who would take advantage of that language and drive you off into a ditch. But I would like to point out that specifically, socialism calls for the controls of the means of production and the actual controls of the space, the marketplace, wherever you're dealing. So at no point did Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid entail forcing people to study medicine, become doctors, to work for the state, forcing nurses, into existence by drafting people like they were going off to fucking Vietnam to become nurses and making them be nurses, building state hospitals where if you've got Medicare coupons, you can only go to the hospital, that the state runs, right?
We have that right? In-network, out-of-network. Right? Anyway.
And also point out, if I may, that the only quote-unquote state hospitals we had that really existed as the state runs a hospital were mental institutions, which Reagan shut down, if you'll recall. That he was so against the state creating any type, and I would argue it wasn't because he was worried about, there was this big fever about right-wingers thought they were all going to be thrown in a mental institution but for wrong think. Remember that bullshit? And they still think it. They still do. But mental institutions like that, he wanted to get rid of it because it was a precedent. If you can treat people for a mental disorder, why not a broken leg? Why not cancer? Right? And so they can't let any of it exist because it would open a situation where if the state's paying for your mental care, even if it's incarcerating you at the time, if you didn't commit a crime, then and you could leave. Technically, you could walk out the front door if you could figure it out, depending on your mental state. Then in theory, there's a legal right for the state to set up hospitals that poor people can go to, or people who don't have insurance could go to. And then what happens, right? So that's why he was fighting it. And it's why it wasn't just that he was like, playing into this right wing, we're all going to be incarcerated for wrong think bullshit, 1984 stuff that they were selling at the time. He literally couldn't allow for a state-run hospital that treated or cared for anyone or anything because of the premise that you could build off of it that, of course, if you're treating someone's schizophrenia, why can't you treat their cancer? Why can't we have a state hospital? This is why they did it. I want people to know this. And it's even the VA, they're trying to outsource a lot of what goes on with the VA.
Yes, that started. Well, this is what Republicans are doing. They're weaving in the private element into I mean, you know what I'm saying, like the for-profit element into the private care. And the VA consistently, when you get into the VA and you use the VA, it has a high approval rating of all the people who use it. It's just getting into it and waiting for care too. That's because of underfunding and all of that that we deal with, and because that's what Republicans do. They underfund things. It's like Obamacare. They take out the affordability mechanisms, and then they cry that it's too expensive. It's they're so crafty, but this is why it does go down to messaging. I think really,
I agree, but I lay that at our feet. Like, as much as, because they don't have a problem with the messaging of it. He fucking sent that was an LP. They mailed those records out to people, and people sat around around a record player listening to that shit. And
so ridiculous.
Our messaging was not pro Medicare for all as a sales point. No. Even amongst the Bernie bros and crowd, they were just insisting that's what it is, and shut the fuck up. How dare you bring up the Obamacare or anything like that? Any half measures are equal to leaving the system in place. Right, which is again part of the problem, and why a lot of the DSA candidates, but for maybe two, distance themselves from the DSA website and the DSA organization now, including Al Sayed. They're going, or even Mamdani saying, I'm not for defunding the police. He hedged
even me.
Right. But it's because the words mean something to you.
Yes.
And if the words, the jargon gets another name, at some point you can either reclaim it or you can jettison it. If you're queer and you're here, get used to it. You can reclaim the word queer and hold it. If being a nationalist and a socialist gets really uncomfortable, you might want to just kick that word down the road, those words down the road, and come up with something else. And this is a similar kind of situation on our side. I think we need to do a much better job selling the implementation over a tried and tested rollout of a system of universal health care in the United States that leaves no one behind and is structurally sound enough that if somebody rolls in like a Ronald Reagan, they can't just slit its fucking belly and watch its guts spill out.
Amen.
The way,
Amen.
Right? Which is the problem we have. They try it with Social Security. Mike Lee's telling his donors, next up, we're getting rid of Social Security.
But that's why Social Security is hard to get rid of, because FDR made it belong to everyone. That's how you have to do it. And he even said that it's going to belong to everyone, so no damn politician can scrap it. And that's how, when Republicans are like, and I even hear Democrats saying things like, well, I don't need it, I'm rich or whatever. But you're missing the point. It's not about whether you need it or not. It's about that we all are in it. It's about it's a collective thing that we
it's like insurance. It's exactly why it's like insurance.
It is
you don't need it. You don't need it until you do. And most people don't think, especially when they're young or well-to-do, don't think they're going to need it. And Ayn Rand, of all fucking people, lived off of Social Security and lied that her boyfriend was her husband so he could get Social Security when she was in her wind down. So she lived off the state tit after all this blather about charity being a mental disease, that Christians, because they believe in caring for other people, we're all mentally ill, and that state can't do anything, and you should always leave it up to the private motives of the rich and powerful, because they will always do what's best for themselves, and that'll trickle down as it's like trickle down selfishness was her
Well, she
theory.
said she says it. You can look it up on YouTube.
Altruism is a mental illness.
How is I mean, we are born. Mother Nature put the oxytocin chemicals in our brain. That's the bonding chemical. Altruism is not a mental illness. It's an essential part of what it means to be a human being, that we can feel each other's pain, that we care about each other. We're supposed to cooperate. And when we do, we can do amazing things. We can also do horrific things. So it's just a matter of where we put our attention. Like JFK said, we're going to go to the moon, because it's hard to do, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's certainly a show of what we can do as a human species together when we work together, something positive, not just making war. So and that's why everything that Republicans stand on is bullshit. Basically, it really is. They're all frauds. They're fake patriots. They're fake Christians. They're fake, whatever, make America great again. It's all a ruse. They don't know how to make anything great, except, they know how to destroy.
Yeah. And the somebody in the chat room said that Mexico has universal health care. No, they don't.
Oh, well,
no, they don't.
They just signed it, right?
No, this is important. This is so important. I want you to listen to me on this. They don't have it. They have a few setup systems, kind of like we do with like the Veterans Affairs and Medicare and those kind of things. But they are unifying it into one where they will have universal health care, I think within 5 to 10 years, depending on how long implementation probably won't take more than 5 years. And they're doing it in phases, incrementally, that it requires the mechanic of building this thing. And that's the clear part that again, it's the how that matters. I feel like, and this is why I'm so fucking anti-jargon. And when people think, that it's like Medicare for all, flip the table and walk away. I mean, it's like the right winger saying that's communism and flipping the table and walking away. It becomes a war over jargon. And I think what's to be learned from and their goal is, let me look it up. It's by 2030. Full consolidation, ensuring any citizen can seamlessly access $0 healthcare at any public facility in Mexico using a single electronic medical record. Now, that's the other aspect of it. Unified health ID cards and the data control of all health records, so that Americans, and to my other DSA friends who want to eliminate the border, they want no borders.
Oh, God.
That means other countries too, which would mean you believe that rich Americans should be able to just roll into Mexico and buy whatever territory with the, having more money without any say from the government or the people or the democracy of, right? Of course not. It's always, you can't eliminate our border without eliminating the other border with it.
That's what I'm saying. You have to, where do these stupid ideas come from? I don't know.
They all trace back to aspirational things are wonderful.
Yeah,
but again,
we'll have no borders. I mean, come on, people.
Well, that goes. I think that's linked back. Honestly, it's linked back by and large when you boil down the crowd that says those things or writes them down to the no private property communist socialist idea, the Marxist and no private property idea, which, by the way, has a really weird, slippery slope into nobody has the right to their own bodily autonomy. If the state needs babies, women have to line up and make them, and men who are in the party can make them. It was a big Chinese movement towards that after they ended the one-child policies, while these rich, Chinese Communist Party guys got all these tennis player girlfriends all of a sudden. That was in line with what that policy was, and that if they said anything, bad things happened to their family. That's I don't think that's where most people who talk about this shit think it will go, but that's where it goes. It's where it always goes. That's the point. But point being is that I think we should have a universal citizen card that Americans get that allow you to vote wherever you are. It can have your current address attached to it digitally, but you don't have to be there to do it. So if you're traveling, you don't have to mail your ballot in because you're not in Arizona. You have your ID and it is you, and there's biometric data with it. And I go, I'm an American citizen. I'm in New York right now. This is election day, but I'm going to vote for my candidate in Arizona and whatever because that's where I live. You know who's against that? Maggots, because they think it's the fucking Antichrist. They think it's the mark of the beast. And the same thing would be true of a unified health ID card, which you would have to have in place for something like Medicare for all. You have to have a uniform. Otherwise, if people came in, people walk in and they don't have to show ID at all. You're right as an American to have this health care. Then the floodgates open. And England has had this problem with the NIH, or the NHS rather, and Sweden has had this a little bit with their immigrant community, is that once you start letting people in, they'll come in just to use the healthcare system and then go home. And so it taxes your system with the sickest people nearby. And this is why the ACA had things about why you had to incentivize young people into the insurance fold, because if it's just old and sick people or just people who have constant illness.
That's why you need the mandate, which was the Republican idea. Okay. And
that's and you had to get rid. And by the way, I have my solution is obvious, which is you let states create their own single payer system, and then the federal single payer system allows you to buy across state lines, and you can buy into Seattle, Washington. If Washington State or California or Massachusetts has a single payer thing, if you want to do a nonprofit, you buy into that state system, and other states will start to compete because they'll recognize that the profit from those things when they do happen is schools and roads and infrastructure and vocational training and that kind of shit, as opposed to bombs and bullets for oil wars. Right. That's what they're afraid of. That's my first stage solution, is that we allow people to buy across state lines into state-based single payer systems. So Massachusetts, Washington State, California, if they want to build one, anybody in the country could buy into theirs.
I would like that.
Yeah,
that would
be
good.
regional control by insurance companies of certain areas is ridiculous. It's like when you couldn't it's like the plot of Smokey and the Bandit when you couldn't bring Coors east of the Rockies because it was bootlegging, whatever, that kind of shit, because there was price fixing and product fixing. That's illegal. Funny. That's silly. That was proved then.
The Bandit.
Yeah, that's what the plot was. You can't bring it.
Yes, I remember now.
It was a whole thing.
Going back.
You're bootlegging, even though it was a product you could buy on the other side of the mountains, you couldn't bring it this way, east of the Mississippi, I think it was. But we have that with insurance right now.
Yeah.
Right? We have that. And so, all right, now, so how do we do this? I know I've been on a tear, and I apologize. I feel like I've dominated this conversation, Tara, but How do we convince certainly the 30% might be a hard sell, but the 60 to 70% of people who are for some sort of government supported healthcare, even if they just support the existence of the Veterans Administration, the VA, or that get the idea that should Medicare, are you good for that? Okay, cool. And you could certainly understand it expanding it under COVID when people got sicker than they normally would outside the age range, whatever. Okay, how do we expand that? I have a theory. I have one theory about how it will happen almost instantly, and I think they're counting on it. But my question is, how do we convince the half of the country that's for these things to buy into and support the method to do it, which would be, you can call it Medicare for all or something else, but get them all on board for the phase in and the time it would take, and so it gets passed.
Yes. Well, I think that there is a clear majority of Americans want the universal health care. It's over 66% now. And that is, I believe, because of Obamacare, where people losing it now, they see, oh, healthcare, we do need it. Healthcare, we like this. We liked being able to not be denied care. But so there's that psychological change. But it really does come down to messaging, because, one of the things that they said that Obama, the number one lie of the year back during the Obamacare.
You keep your doctor.
Well, yes. If you like your insurance, you can keep your insurance. That was the lie of the year. And what I always said, like, who the hell likes their insurance? Nobody likes insurance. They like going to the doctor. And and they conflated that deliberately, because nobody likes insurance. Look I'm not saying commit violence against anybody, but look at what happened to that guy when he was murdered on the street. It wasn't like nobody cared, you know what I mean? Like, and it was
sure they did. I will push back on that 1 second. Here's what I will say is that all the CEO, healthcare CEO, wait, healthcare CEO pay went up.
Oh God! Oh, because they, we're putting our lives at risk.
Yeah, they need security. We're just doing what the shareholders want us to do. We're just the face of this fucking thing.
Yeah,
you guys are all voting for it. The board members aren't having to worry about it. But if they hire a CEO to run the function of the company, they're getting paid more money. Now.
Right. But the public at large, it was a collective shrug, and people even said, I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner or more often. Frankly, everybody has a story about the health insurance racket. So it really is about messaging it. And what upsets me is that the Democrats certainly don't have a unified message, especially with Hakeem Jeffries going on Meet the Press and saying he doesn't support it and all that.
Well, no, here's the thing. Not supporting Medicare for all is not the only possibility
that's what he means
of a message. Well, no, I'm genuinely, like, in defense of the problem that he has, and this might be a district issue with him as well, because he still is a representative for that district, even if he is the minority leader.
He did support it. He was a co-sponsor of the bill up until 2024, when he started receiving the, he's the number one recipient of money
as he
from
became
health insurance.
As he became the leader of the Democrats. But again,
that's right.
He now represents the Democrats as a secondary constituency in the House, and there is not material agreement on this. And I know I'm keeping you over. But
I just have to take a call at 2:15. So
all right, I'll let you go. But here's the thing: my concern is, and what I really want is for us to get better at selling the elements of what we call Medicare for all, and the value of the mechanics of how you do it and you install it in a way that Republicans can't just undermine it like they did with Obamacare, even if it means piece by piece. And in the case of there's a bunch of people who I think are against Medicare for all in the wording, in the same way that the Obama administration was against gay marriage. They weren't. They were for civil union. because that's where the public was. And if they'd have said, we're for gay marriage, they never would have gotten elected, and we would not have gay marriage now.
You're right.
Because sometimes you've got to lead by following. You've got to sheepdog the public in some issues, and this is definitely one of them. So I will keep asking everybody on Medicare for All and those kind of things. I love the sentiment. I think we all share the goal.
Yes.
How? And somebody just said drop the age. Nobody can single-handedly drop the age. President can't do it. You can't executive order it. It's got to be a whole reshaping of the law. That it was designed so it couldn't be reshaped that way. You'd have to create a whole new bill and pass it. It's possible, but it will require taxes beyond what it currently takes, specifically for that reason. And Medicare is a subsidiary of payment of Social Security, so it comes out of your taxes that way.
Right.
So I'm just saying how. This is the thing.
Yes.
How? And then as soon as we do that, get on the road.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to tell the American people also, they understand we pay more and get less. We leave millions out, millions go bankrupt, and everybody has a story. And, that's how you message it. Like this has to be.
But that's how we've been messaging it.
I don't know if people know that, though. I don't think
it's how Obamacare came around. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
If everybody has a story, that was the main one. Was that medical bankruptcies were our primary way of
that was
pushing
one of
for
them.
ACA.
That's true. That is true. They did mention that. I remember now. But then,
well, you don't have to answer it today. It's something we can all grind on. I know you have a call. But
I'm sorry. I wish I didn't. It's kind of annoying.
No, it's good
to continue.
It's okay, but we can like honestly, this is something I'd love to circle back with you on and maybe make some progress on and go. Okay,
I'd love to
maybe
this is like my passion. I wish. I want to see this.
Maybe this is how
I die.
Maybe there's something to learn from how Mexico is implementing this in this 2026 to 2030 plan, and there's ways of doing it within the United States that through Medicare expansion and again the universal kind of medical records rights that you have and the portability of it that might pair together pretty well. So it's something to work on. I would love to work this out. So that instead of people just saying bumper sticker, you can go, okay, cool. I'd rather have a map than a bumper sticker.
Yeah. We'll do that. What's that lady from Homeland? With the board, we'll carry from Homeland. We'll carry from Homeland it.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. Yeah, we need a strategy beyond rhetoric, and I appreciate it so much. Anyways, but the first step though is we got to retake the House and the Senate. So that's an excellent point.
There you go.
All right, guys. Awesome. All right, have a good call. I'll talk to you later.
I'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
There she goes, Tara Devlin. Everybody. And I hope you guys are. Well, I mean, I know longtime viewers are aware of this, but I for a long time have had a real issue with jargon. And if you watched my, my special Charmageddon, when I talk about, unsweetened iced tea and those kind of things, I'm joking around about the kind of manufactured words and the weight that we put on them. But there is a real issue where we see, especially in the political realm, where people will defend the words so much so that more than they'll defend the policy itself. And then I see this increasing thing, especially in the slacktivist crowd, around the faux-gressives especially, where they'll defend the word and the jargon so much that they're offended that you might ask the how question. Because let's do it. How do we do it? Well, you just do it. All right, just say the thing. Just yell. It also goes with the crowd saying we need fighters. No, we kind of need explainers. Medicare for All is jargon. It is. It's a phrase. It's not actually how you would run it. What it is take Medicare and make it for everyone. I get it as an idea. But how you make it happen is crucial, because you could start off wrong and it won't end up being Medicare for everyone. It'll become slightly expanded Medicare, but with means-tested limitations. Does that make sense? Yeah, faux-gressive, fake progressives, bullshitters. Yes, how do you make it happen? That's right. That's the crucial thing to me. And yes, here somebody just said M4A, which again, you want to talk about like bumper stickering it, not even calling it Medicare for all. The M4A is a convenient way to say healthcare reform. No, it isn't, because think of all the myriad ways, big and small, you could reform healthcare in the country, right? And again, just because that jargon works for you, it obviously does not work for others. So the fallback shouldn't be, I shouldn't have to defend my jargon. It's, you know what? Here's another way of saying it. This is actually what we're talking about. This is, and this is why I think it would be better. And yeah, it will be means tested if you don't have a plan to make sure it's not means tested. Because again, you might start off with this idea, we're going to have Medicare for all. And then you're like, yeah, but we can't get the tax expansion passed because certain states will refuse it. And it will mean taxing, even if we do the wealth tax and the billion, long term, to run a national healthcare system on this scale, you're going to need to tax everybody for it. Now, in theory, in future, that means you don't have to worry about medical payments because you're paying into this thing. But at first, it's going to hurt. How it needs to be able to be explained at a coffee shop. No, we need to get it out of the coffee shop, because I think you can explain Medicare for all, in a coffee shop. It's plenty. It's plenty for a coffee shop conversation. You need to be able to craft legislation and get it passed. Is how getting UHC money. Please. If that's your only fallback, and again, that is equally a bumper sticker that goes in line with just yelling Medicare for all and saying that should do it. That's the argument. Done. Social Security got done. Medicare for all can get done. I agree, but Social Security is actually the source of most of the debt that we have taken on. Most of it is borrowed from the Social Security trust fund. That's why Al Gore wanted to separate it. It's in constant threat of going insolvent. There's a bipartisan bill that worked its way through the House to try and keep Social Security solvent through a certain amount of time, right? But they're always fighting that tax base to make that possible. And if you have an exploded generation like the baby boomers, followed by a smaller generation of workers that have to pay for the future care that's right ahead of them, then it's going to be tight. And if you have those waves, it's going to have to be part of the legislation. How do you do it? Tax the rich, and then and along with no more billionaires. Like, well, then how? Raise the cap's a great idea. Yes. And again, I like the idea of a billionaire 5% tax on, and I think the raise on capital gains should be the primary one. Should be super easy. I've also suggested that we should have a transactional tax on all stock sales. Any stock worth over $1 that trades both directions, you buy or sell a stock for $5, there's a nickel on that on every single trade. The volume of that alone, first, it would slow down some of the worthless volatility in the market. People who just buy and sell stocks just to buy and sell stocks and don't give a fuck about the value of a company or the employees or whether they make anything worth a goddamn or any of that. But you could also take that money and what is there, you could fund a tremendous amount of the social safety net just on that movement alone. Just a sales tax on stocks. Why not? I mean, you could make it'd be more, you probably have to design it more like a fee, right? But think about day trading and the volume of trading that goes on every day, and the market going up and down. And when they're talking about in thousands upon thousands, millions of shares of stock that are bought and sold, if the people who play around in those stocks all the time, if you put a 5 cent per trade, you generate billions on, and if there was a a new market like AI comes in, or a new industry comes online, like humanoid robotics and all that stuff, which is supposed to come on, and you've got a company like Tesla, which is, he thinks it's going to be a $1 trillion company, blah blah blah. Those kind of things in real money, not in leveraged all over the place 5 companies posing as one bullshit. But the trades alone in chasing that and going away, if you buy into it or you sell out of it, you still get a coming and going tax, a fee on that, call it a volatility tax. And since the US government, and therefore the taxpayer, is responsible for the stability of the stock market, even to the point where they can stop it, and they can, there can be emergency freezes on it and those kind of things. If we're responsible for that, then the benefit should come as well in terms of a fee for the function. In the same way that we all pay taxes for the FAA, even if we don't fly, because if a plane falls out of the sky, even if you never fly, it might land on your house, right? Yeah. So yeah, that would be a simple one. That and it could be so minor as to be indisputable. And the only people it would really hurt in a financial way are people who buy and sell stocks on the quarter penny worth, where they're just bouncing back and forth and buying and selling in the same day, which is terrible for investment. With the whole purpose of, in theory, of buying stock in a company is you believe in what it's doing, you're going to stick around, you're going to leave your money like a loan in that company, and they're going to pay you a dividend, which is basically a form of interest. But if you're just buying it and selling it in the same fucking day, you're not doing the company any good at all. As a matter of fact, you could, in theory, you're harming it, because there's no consistency in its stock worth, especially when you're doing it on such a, like, by the, shaving pennies, right? Just when I thought I was out, I'll pull me back in. So yeah, so I think a 5-cent stock transaction to start, on any stock over, and keep it consistent. Whether you buy a stock that costs $200 a share or $20 a share, it's the same nickel. It's just a fee. And so in theory, if you were buying and selling bigger stocks, the richer companies, you could absorb it, and the smaller companies would be more steady, because if you're buying a $10 or $20 stock, you're less likely to move it around a bunch. But if the big companies, if it's $250 for a stock, a nickel either way isn't going to bother you. So the volatility that impacts the bigger companies is their issue, not the lower part of the market. You don't force smaller companies actually would get a slight psych benefit, maybe. It's a theory. I'm sticking to it. I think it's a good way to go. I think it's one of those areas where we all, whether we're in the market or whether you own stocks or whether you have a retirement fund that's in stocks or whatever, or you don't, there's still both a benefit aspect of it, increasing, the value and strength of business over time that you might benefit from because of whatever job you have and yada, yada. But also, if it crashes and you're on the hook for it because of shit that happened in the stock market, you're going to feel it too. You're going to bear the burden of the failure. So there should be in there in sort of like FDIC insurance to some degree, a little extra payment that creates a social safety net, so that if the bottom does drop out, it doesn't fall through the floor. Does that make sense? Does that work for everybody? That would be one of the ways I would do it. Percentage on every trade is a problem, because then it leverages. It specifically would be viewed as weighting against more successful companies, and you'd never pass it, right? Your president is right? And then the cap on Social Security, like you don't pay past a certain point, again, it's not technically a cap. It's we can only take so much of your money. That's the issue. And the dollar amount adjusted for inflation over time, the law would have to be completely reworked. I'm not against it, but it would have to be reworked. The debt is a talking point. Yeah, I would agree that ironically, I think the debt has gone up in direct parallel to the GDP of the country, and I think it also sometimes Republicans will fight against the debt in a way because it brings the lie about government investment in something. If you think of it this way, the debt is government investment in the people. And that investment over time has paid off. That when we fix something after COVID and we have to patch that thing and we help people salvage their businesses and their livelihoods after something like 2008 or those kind of things, when the government intervention actually leads to growth and more possibility. And one of the biggest examples, of course, is the intranet that became the internet. It was a government created system that was turned loose on the public, and it is effectively one of the greatest examples, along with the highway system and the dam system and the electrical grid, of government investment, a public work invested that allowed the private lives of everyone else to go up. Everybody, what you did with it wasn't equally, but your access was equal by and large. Okay. And so the cap was designed because we couldn't pay out that much. Yes, exactly. It was to mitigate how much it would, but it was also part of why it passed. When they talk about why Social Security passed, part of it was all the things they didn't get, because if they tried these things, that would have, if it could be in there, it's in there. Right. Democrats should do stuff now. It's too complicated. This is why DSA is gaining popularity. If that's what you're taking, what I'm saying, it's very silly. Democrats are doing stuff. Democrats, by the way, crafted and passed the Obamacare and the ACA. Obama had better immigration numbers than Trump has, and he didn't have to shoot anybody in the street. There's a difference. DSA is popular right now because people are pissed. It's not as popular as they say. It's popular in certain districts. And again, if you can make a blue district bluer, knock yourself out. But until you start turning a purple district or a red district blue, we're not really having a conversation, because the votes will stay the same and Republicans will still be in power. Bluer is not a thing. The only job right now, and this may be what Hakeem Jeffries is up to, I don't know, is the only job of the DNC right now is to turn red districts purple and purple districts blue. And if you can go from red to blue, that's best. But nobody gets any points for bluer. Why am I literally shaking? I think it's just the camera. My desk. This is a wobbly desk. Sorry. So, Sinistar for all. This is, Obama wanted the public option, but Lieberman wouldn't allow it. That's exactly right, Trucker John. And the question isn't like, how do you get Obama to just shove it through anyways? Well, first of all, he can't, because of how our system's supposed to work. And Donald Trump is finding that out in a bunch of different ways and is very frustrated. That's why he's signing all these 2025 executive orders. The question really becomes, like, how do we get what are effectively the Liebermans of the world on board? Some of it will just be reality over time. So why was he talking to Kirshner? I'm going to guess because they're not getting anything from the White House and any of those places. Like they can't call him in. The Republicans aren't going to call him in for a hearing. But there's this idea like, hey, man, tell me what's going on. What the fuck is up? Or when we're in power, which we are going to be, we're going to convene hearings and drag your ass in there. Because you might be able to hide what you're saying to the president, but you can't hide what you're saying as a private citizen on behalf of the United States. And that's going to get real funky real fast. I think that might be part of it. Benefit of the doubt. DSA rise is a direct response to the failures. No. The DSA rise isn't, again, it's materially, if you look at like Tara, who's a member of the DSA, who isn't for the more extreme risen parts of what they are for, is in parallel with most of the stuff Democrats have been trying for a long time. The question isn't become like how entrenched can your base become about your ideas, but how can you convey those things to the other side or people who are against it or in theory are against it or think they're against it and get them on board. That's what matters. Hal, are you going to cover Donald and Melania arguing on this afternoon show? I would like to show some of that. Again, she's got resting honeypot face, so I'm not ever sure whether Melania is actually, whether they're being. I think they're just both awful. So I don't know how we can discern when they're being awful to each other. I know when they're pretend liking each other, but so by the way, I'm going to keep talking about this in the around the mechanics of it because I'm actually for this. I'm for a strong infrastructure, a good social safety net, public schools, universal health care. I want these things. I want them for everybody. Okay. But what I see is a lot of times is people who would rather argue about the language, the name, and what to call it than materially get it in place. And then when we do make progress, especially in areas like the ACA, which had the seeds of a potential for a single payer within it over time, and again, leaning into that buying across state lines into state single payer systems, which I do think should be a thing, that it was so derided by the people who thought it should have gone further. It's, the ACA's unpopularity wasn't just people who thought it was communism and socialism, but also people who thought it didn't go far enough, right? That was the 56% that were against it. These would be the people who would consider themselves DSA, I guess, right now. They were against it. They thought it was terrible because they thought it should go further. And that was to my point about why somebody's against something matters more than what they're against when you're dealing with the aftermath or the system you're going to put in place. Right? Kim says, now is the time we have the momentum. No, we don't. We don't have the momentum. We have just enough momentum right now to take the House back and maybe squeeze the Senate out of it. That's the momentum we have. That momentum does not extend past a 60% majority in the House or the Senate, which is what we need. We genuinely need this. If you want Medicare for all, you don't need blue districts bluer. You need purple districts blue. Shit, you need red districts purple. It's the only way it happens. For real. And that takes work. And it has to matter to you. And it's very uncomfortable for people to argue, against their, the bumper sticker or the team name or whatever it is, and before the actual thing. And it's why allegedly, and I say allegedly because I don't buy it, people hate politicians and they hate politics and nothing happens. All that language is because when stuff starts to happen, you start getting involved in the art of the possible. And when everything isn't possible, there's a bunch of people who are going to say, I didn't get everything I wanted, so nothing works. No one wants Medicare for all. I would argue that a lot of people do, but I also would argue that a lot of people don't agree on what that means. Universal healthcare is what people want. Yes, but they don't. A lot of them don't believe that universal healthcare is either possible or advisable, or if it limits your ability to get healthcare on your own or whatever, they would automatically be against it. I would also like to remind you, and this might be a shock, but there are a bunch of people who, like in the Curtis Yarvin, or what's his name, J.D. Vance's mentor, and Peter Thiel, and a lot of those folks, they don't believe in universal health care, not because they believe in a for-profit insurance system because they're not in those companies. They want everybody to just fucking die. They're just fucking straight up eugenicists. They're like everything that maggots say about Bill Gates is a depopulation. What is it like? He's for the total depopulation of the earth. That's true of a bunch of the people around JD Vance. Just give us what Congress gets. Well, again, you're going to have to raise taxes a lot to do it, and they're going to have to raise taxes on their people to do it. And I'm not against it, but you got to convince those people that it's worth it. And if the bankruptcies and the stories that that Tara was talking about and that I've mentioned aren't enough to convince them so far, obviously something else has to do it. Dead people don't buy their stuff. Yeah, they don't sell stuff. Those folks don't sell stuff. They don't. It's especially the ones that are in software. It's all relative. Yeah, Medicaid saved my life, but I got a 25-cent raise and it went bye-bye. Yeah, well, that's why you have a tiered system, and that's why they set it up that way so that they could kick people off of it. I would argue that there should be in every welfare system that you set up, if the goal is to get people off of it so they don't have to be on it long term, or they don't, or the tax base that we do have isn't spent paying for people who don't necessarily need it, you'd have a sloped system to get them out of it instead of just a cutoff. Like if I take this next job, I won't get, I lose my insurance. Like that trade-off is obviously the fiscally responsible thing to do is not go to work. You got to take away that incentive as well. And that's one of the things I think arguably that universal healthcare in that regard does for businesses across the board. It eliminates obviously the part of their benefits package that they might lure people with, which is why a lot of them are fighting the total elimination of insurance because they want the concierge service, medical service, that kind of stuff to be available as part of what they offer their executive packages and yada yada yada. But still, I think the baseline of it that you could expand. How please explain universal healthcare paid for via taxes? Okay. The primary way it would be an expansion of payroll taxes without a cap or a raised cap. Let's say it doesn't stop at $185,000. It goes to, let's say, $500,000. Just start there so that people who already have a head start don't stay way ahead. Because one of the things that you do when you start chipping away at what's effectively the upper middle class is that you entrench rich. But it's the same thing that like leverage debt benefits the super elites and not people in the middle who can't get a loan even though they deserve it. Right. Okay. So the idea is that you need three payment structures to do it. One would be the sort of payroll taxes. You could implement what would effectively be a minor value added tax, a VAT tax, or a similar fee like payment across the board for goods, just a sales tax of, and it would be a hard line sales tax at every at payment point, 5 cents, that kind of thing, kind of like a gas tax per gallon. But you would do this ubiquitously across everything, so that instead of changing the income tax base and forcing poor people to pay a specific chunk of income tax, which might be an egregious bigger number right out of the gate, that there would be a fractionalized amount that they could mitigate if they had less money or less disposable income. They would buy less things, and therefore they would pay less of that little tax if they needed to. So it gives some variability still to it. So those two are the primary ones, and then, like I said, I would do it with a stock trading tax. That would be it. Those would be the primary ones. And then you'd have the sort of payroll tax stuff that's in place for Medicare in the people that get the sickest and, the oldest folks, which is where Medicare sits, and Medicaid, which are, again, lifestyle diseases within what Medicaid covers, is often the most expensive stuff there exists anyway. So we're already taking the insurance industry's biggest problems off their books. So we just slowly take the rest off. Grace is saying we already pay for it. We do already pay for it, but we pay for it for other people who can't afford it. Right? That's different. We don't pay enough for everybody to have it. Yet. You would have to. So you'll have to raise it to do that. And I'm not against it, but that's what you're going to have to do. And you're going to have to express how we do that. Yes, we already pay for Medicare and Medicaid, but we don't pay for I think we can argue, we don't pay for everybody who needs Medicaid right now. There are more people who I would argue need and should qualify for Medicaid, but we tighten that because there's not enough money to go around. We would have to expand the amount we pay for Medicare and Medicaid, which would include a new taxation schedule. And again, you're like, fine, let's do it. But you have to talk the other people into doing it. You have to get them on board. You'd have to pass it. Or, at the very least, you got to get 60% Dems in the House and the Senate and a Democratic president who will tell them to go pound sand until it gets done. That's the other option. That you do have that option. You could elect nothing but Democrats. And even if you had some people who were against it, if you had blue dogs, if you had so many Democrats in there, eventually you'd have a volume of them that was big enough to make this happen. That's your other option. But if the focus is on making blue districts bluer, that's never going to happen. VAT taxes, agreed. A VAT. It's like ATM. I get it. A value-added tax, but it's easier than just saying it. But adding a VAT as opposed to a vat of goo, I think that's why people say VAT tax, actually, as opposed to just because the word VAT has other meanings. Yeah. It's a tough one. Medicare for all reduces cost out. How? I mean, I get the profit margin on insurance, but it doesn't lower the cost of pharmaceuticals or surgeries or facilities or hospitals or syringes, gauze pads, like tubing, right? Buying in bulk can in some ways, right? But not necessarily. And then again, we have to agree as the public what qualifies as bulk. We have a huge instance of heart disease and diabetes in this country. So do people with heart disease and diabetes get massive priority on the funds, however limited, that exist over people with rarer diseases? Right? Because if you're bulk buying, you're automatically not buying other stuff. And you're planning for these diseases. Call it what it is, Hal, obesity. First of all, type 1 diabetes wouldn't be obesity related. And heart disease isn't necessarily linked directly to the obese, certainly not morbidly obese or what's left out there. And again, that's where, by the way, watch for the GLP-1s to bring down, and Trump is going to tout this. He's going to beat his chest about this. That GLP-1s, GLP-2s and 3s, which would be like Ozempic, whatever the fucking Zepatide it is, Trizepatide and Retatrutide, those things are going to be, they're going to start handing those things out. It's the closest thing to fluoride that they're going to want to put in the water to bring people's weight back down, that kind of stuff. Yes, and GLP-1 is going to get rid of those, which will bring down the cost overall of other health stuff. This is, again, my argument for why, like, anti-aging and anti-obesity drugs are going to be the first line, because the diseases caused that cascade after those things are way more expensive. And if you can head those off, you can limit the costs of those things. So watch for insurance is going to, that's why GLP-1s, the price of them has gone down so much. That's why Trump claimed that that prescription costs have gone down under him when he had nothing to do with it. It was literally that GLP-1s went from a rare thing to ubiquitous, and the cost of them went down, and that doctors are prescribing those as a way of driving down costs in other areas in the future. Now, it's not like Costco. The medical industry is a lot different. Not in the case of government. The government, when it, and again, this is the argument for how you make Medicare and the VA solvent, is you allow them to buy certain pharmaceuticals in bulk, expensive ones, and negotiate a larger price. And big insurance companies are doing the exact same thing. They're negotiating with them that we'll okay this drug, but you have to let us buy it in, through, like, you have to give us a break. If our people are on this, if they're on our insurance, you got to shave 20% off, and we'll recommend to doctors that this is one of the things we cover. They do it all the time. Honestly, I don't understand why. Who says I'm anti-Medicare for all? It's the phrase. It's not enough. And I guess maybe that's the problem. Maybe the power of jargon is so strong that as I try to work out how you implement something, free drugs, there you go. And again, how? If you try, my argument is you have to implement it in stages, which means you have to win over people who are currently against it. And those are by and large not Democrats. Those are Republicans and other folks. You have to think of it almost like a constitutional amendment. We have to get buy-in from the states to make it happen. Because if you try to throw it together quickly, they will destroy it as fast as they can for ideological reasons. That's what I was pointing out about Reagan and the mental institutions. These were state hospitals. Why did he shut them down? Because he didn't care if crazy people were running around the streets? No, he specifically did this because on an ideological from an ideological standpoint, there could be no state hospitals, because if they do exist, you could make an argument that we could have state hospitals that treat other things, and then the sprawl of that, and then socialism and whatever. That's what he was trying to stop. That's why he shut it down. Like, Israel gets money for us to have that. They also have a security state, and Israelis have also signed off on an Israeli identification card that is ubiquitous throughout the country, and that's how you participate in it. You can't keep coming back to the country to get regular treatments, but if you got treated there, they would treat you, but you can't do it regularly because you have to have this card. Again, you have to get that card in place. It's what Mexico is doing. Mexico is doing this uniform records thing. Well, you and I both know that there is a huge, chunk of the fucking electorate on the right, especially, but certainly there's the Maha adjacent lefties who, are anti-vaxxers or what have you, who wouldn't be on board with that anyways, which again is how you need the system in place. So you've got to start convincing those people, and you've got to start building on that. And that's why I think one of the easiest ways is to eliminate the rules on buying insurance across state lines, specifically when it comes to state-run single-payer systems, like Massachusetts, like Washington State. And then if other states wanted to set it up, if you don't want to buy insurance or from a, or you want to view it as a form of sort of taxation as opposed to paying for it, you could join their systems, a nonprofit state-run system, and it would be an incentive for other states to come up with their own if it was benefiting the state. Again, the profit would go to the infrastructure of that state or whatever the state and its near neighbors benefit from, as opposed to buying somebody a fucking yacht. Do it for selfish reasons, healthy for you to have healthy neighbors. That I agree with. But again, that's contagious disease. And part of the reason why the Curtis Yarvin and the J.D. Vances of the world are against it is because they think everything is a lifestyle disease, and your lifestyle that is that you're poor. And therefore, being poor is a disease and death is the cure. Honestly. Medi-Cal is good for California. I agree. Israel has Medicare for all, right? Yes, but they also have a ubiquitous citizenship system that runs it, that you have to get past to make it solvent and work, which we don't have in the United States, largely because of the federal system we have. We also don't have a parliament. This stuff matters. And if you act like it doesn't, it's never going to get passed. It just isn't. And if people want to struggle forever without helping anybody, I would rather make incremental progress that saves lives and build towards something than go, man, I really gave it our all. People are still dying all over the place. But man, when we elected those people and they didn't do everything all at once, we told them to fuck themselves. Like, that's where we are right now. That's the TYT system. If we can't get everything, nobody gets anything. Do we question NASA because of people who deny the moon landing? No, but the Republicans try to cut NASA funding all the time, even if they don't care about that. You've got to make it resilient. People's lives are on the line. You got to be willing to build this. He said, go to watch the reality of universal healthcare in Germany versus American private healthcare. So explain universal healthcare in real terms. I understood. So if anything, it's a mix of the two, right? There you go. And again, you're going to have to establish some of this stuff and prove it. It's why, like with Mom Donnie's grocery stores, cool, fill your boots, do it. But it's going to have to pilot for a while before people that aren't already on board trust it enough to replicate it. And then when they start replicating it, the replicas of it have to be run equally as well, or people are going to go, well, that was a one-off because that's New York. This stuff doesn't work. And they will use that not only to stop that from happening, but to stop people from trying piloting stuff like that in general. Fuck the increment with this tax or that. It will work that. It will work that way. What? It won't work that way. I see. Well, if it can't work that way, it won't work at all. We're in a democracy. People have say. And again, this is crisis versus emergency talk. We've had this before. Amsterdam, they have a good Medicaid system. Amsterdam's a city, but okay. New ideas scare a lot of folks. Yeah, they do. That's reason enough. 56 Nick Rich. Excellent point. It doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean it won't work. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm being very clear here. I think I'm being very clear here. I know I like the snap response to some folks because, again, if you're not all in on the jargon, they think you're not all in on the idea. And my problem is that the jargon is not convincing the people it needs to convince. And it's okay. I'm giving you permission to explain yourself to the minutia and not be afraid to explain it. And if you feel like you're having to explain it again and again and again and again, it's not it indicative of the weakness of your argument. Some people are just fucking thick. You're just going to have to work this through. And again, some of them have been jargoned on their side into thinking this is just evil to start with. Again, like if you want universal health care, you're going to need a universal health card, which means you are going to have to organize people's health records, which means you are going to have to convince a bunch of people from the hippies to the yuppies to the elites that stuff can be online and trusted. And if you don't want to, then knock yourself out. You're going to have to move to how you need to educate yourself more on universal health care. Everyone does. Everyone does. And again, we're not even talking about, in the United States, we're not talking about universal health care. We're talking about the implementation of it in this country with our system of government. in a non-monarchical system, in a non-parliamentary system, in a state, in a place that arguably has states' rights and all that stuff. Those are hurdles. You can't pretend if you're in a race that has hurdles, you can't pretend you're in a sprint and just think I'll just run around the hurdles. It doesn't work that way. Never will. Have some respect for the work that needs to be done, or you will have no respect for the workers that do it. That settles it. I think that's a new Sparksism. We're just going to leave it at that and let people stew on that. Because if you have no respect for the work that needs to be done, you will have no respect for the workers that do it. And this stuff takes work. And if you think it doesn't, or you think it shouldn't, when anybody tries, you're going to view them with disdain. You are going to view them as the enemy. Which again, if in theory, somebody who wants something like universal health care would try to keep their enemies few and genuine. And to all those who say the jargon is more important than the policy or the principle, have fun watching TYT. They'll love you over there.
The screen glows bright with a crooked smile. Words spill out. All venom, no style. Promises made, they rot in the air. A handshake, a lie, a blank.
Yeah, that was my point, Corbin. Thanks, Trucker John.